have already started to hit. They were imposed over Europe's subsidies to aircraft manufacturer Airbus. In a parallel dispute involving American aid for US firm Boeing, the EU won the right to hit back with tariffs on imports from the States. Brussels is expected to hold fire until after the US election. While an actual trade deal between the economic giants seems a distant prospect, a win for Joe Biden might make things easier.
I do think that the tone of the talks is going to change. I mean, I don't need to elaborate on why it is extremely difficult, not to say impossible, to have any dealings with the White House under Trump. But I think if there's somebody reasonable, then we may still have different interests or different viewpoints, but we will negotiate, we will discuss like, you know, civilized grown-ups and friends.
A series of political disputes has also heightened transatlantic tensions. A recurring theme for President Trump has been NATO and the idea that the US effectively subsidizes European members of the defense alliance.
So Germany's delinquent. They've been delinquent for years, and they owe NATO billions of dollars, and they have to pay it.
And when Trump announced he was quitting a Cold War-era nuclear arms treaty, French President Emmanuel Macron called for a true European army, saying the EU needed to, quote, protect itself from China, Russia and even the United States. One senior official in the Obama administration believes continuing this war of words could cause real damage.
It's a deep concern here to not be able to credibly rely upon Europe and go to Europe on a consistent basis and deal with issues that affect us. And the key one in recent years on terrorism and the flow of terrorists in and out of Syria and the Islamic State, that required collective action to defeat the Islamic State network.
Among EU citizens, the US's image is at an all-time low. Part of the reason is Donald Trump's response to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. While major changes in areas like trade and defence could be a long way off, whoever's in the White House come January is likely to face calls to work more closely with Europe on combating the coronavirus. Nadeem Barber, Al Jazeera.
Well, we have big developments, major projection. Kamal.
Yes, thank you, Nick. I actually thought the last chat I had with you might have been the last for the night, given it's now 3 in the morning on the US East Coast. But look at this. Joe Biden is the projected winner of 11 electoral college votes in the state of Arizona. This is so significant on so many levels, not least of all the fact that this is the first state to flip in this 2020 election. Look at the popular vote in the end. He's done it by 5%, with 84% reporting at this stage. That is enough for the Associated Press to make that call and put it in the column for Joe Biden. This is a massive, massive turn in the state of this race. Let's look at the state of this race. When we add those electoral college votes onto Joe Biden's total, 236, that puts him, why can't I do the maths quickly, 34 electoral college votes away from 270. Now, if I come in, he doesn't necessarily need to win Wisconsin now. He still needs the likes of Pennsylvania, Michigan. Nevada, I think, could be interesting here as well. 6 electoral college votes in Nevada, which you would expect to go blue as well. That would help him as well. This is a big boost for Joe Biden's bid for the presidency, for the White House, because he can now take one of those blue wall states, Wisconsin, out of the equation and still win the White House. Again, I'll hop out the way so you can see the numbers. The time is approaching 0800 hours GMT, which is 3 p.m. on the US East Coast. Joe Biden, 236 electoral college votes. Donald Trump, 213. As I said, Nick, I thought we were done for the night, given the hour.
It gets more extraordinary as time goes on.
It really is. This is the one we've been talking about for so long. If Joe Biden could pick up those urban areas in and around Phoenix, because they account for 40% of the whole state. And he's done that.
He's done it. The flip's happened.
And he's flipped one. And
right.
It's just...
So now all eyes on the blue wall.
The blue wall, exactly. Yeah. It's all about that now.
OK, Kamal, talk to you later. Thanks very much. So the media and social media have become war zones during Donald Trump's presidency. Let's hear now from Richard Gisbert, who's presenter of our media analysis programme, The Listening Post.
Donald Trump's inauguration set the tone. From that day, when he flat out lied about the size of the crowd, it was clear that the U.S. news media did not know what to make of the president's on-again, off-again relationship with the truth.
Series of, well, we have to label it untruths.
We now have a case where he's made another charge and he has not got evidence. Why are we surprised?
It's such a racist question.
Until Donald Trump came along, the White House press corps had been reluctant to accuse any American president of lying. That is no longer the case. The Washington Post has counted how many times Trump has lied or misled Americans. The number is more than 22,000, forcing journalists to call it what it is.
This president is a serial liar, and he serially lied tonight.
How do you defend 22,000 falsehoods? By attacking and calling the media outlets reporting on them fake news.
The dishonest media. Nobody has any idea how corrupt the media is. Well, I just think it's a nasty question. One false story after another. You are the enemy of the people. Quiet.
With this administration constantly misleading citizens, journalists have grown ever more reliant on leaks from disgruntled White House insiders, ex-insiders turned pundits, or ex-cabinet officials turned authors. Some of those leaks have proven to be misleading and have come back to bite the news outlets that bought into them. Remember Russiagate.
The allegations that Russia might have been gathering material, video of Mr. Trump, that could be used to blackmail him.
Stories of Russian meddling in the 2016 election and allegations the Trump campaign and the Kremlin had worked together, complete with that sexy Cold War angle, were too much for news channels not named Fox to resist. The eventual retractions were damaging, since they lent the president's fake news narrative some credibility.
We're actually correcting a story that we have been reporting throughout the day today.
The U.S. media landscape, divided before Donald Trump was elected, has since grown far more polarized. In one corner, the liberal side, including outlets like CNN, MSNBC, and the New York Times. In the other, Fox News, broadcast upstarts like One America News, and conservative platforms such as the Christian Broadcasting Network and the Washington Times, which owe their resurgent audiences to the president. Time and again, Americans have seen those rival journalistic camps take the same news story and spin it in entirely different directions. The COVID-19 story has proven to be much harder for Fox and its ilk to manipulate, since there's no way to spin infection rates and mortality figures. If Donald Trump loses this election, prepare to see some journalists claiming at least some of the credit, calling it a victory for the Fourth Estate. Some of them will be justified to a certain extent. There are news outlets that have been locking horns with the president for years, producing some adversarial quality journalism along the way. But until 2020, they failed to really move the needle. In fact, fewer Americans trust their news media today than in 2016. What it took to sink Donald Trump in the polls was COVID-19 and the science. Hard data. It doesn't lie. And try as he might, the president has no answer for that.
It is 0800 GMT. It is the middle of the night, 3 a.m. in Washington, D.C., but that has not stopped President Trump from coming out to address his supporters at the White House. This has been one of the most divisive and unpredictable U.S. elections in memory. And even though Trump initially trailed Biden, he quickly picked up electoral college votes, but there's no clear winner yet. However, we have just learned that Arizona is going to Joe Biden. Let's cross over to Rob Reynolds in Los Angeles, in California. He's following the returns on the West Coast. And Rob, we were speaking 5 or 6 minutes ago about the importance of Arizona, and then moments later, the flip happened. Tell us more.
Yes, and the important part is, one of the important aspects is that this is a flip. This is Joe Biden taking away a state that was won by President Trump in 2016. And it's all the more remarkable because Arizona has always been one of the most rock-ribbed Republican states in the Union. It is the home state of Barry Goldwater, who is considered the founder of the modern conservative movement, although some of the developments of that movement would probably shock the former senator from Arizona, the late senator from Arizona, Barry Goldwater. The state has gone Democratic twice in its history. Once in 1948 when Harry Truman beat Thomas Dewey. The second time when in 1996, when Bill Clinton beat Bob Dole rather resoundingly. The numbers we have now with 82% of the vote in is Biden 51 and Trump 46%. Also in Arizona, a flip of a important Senate seat. The Democratic challenger Mark Kelly has beaten Martha McSally, the incumbent Republican who was appointed to her seat to fill out the term of the late Senator John McCain. And I mentioned McCain as well as having some impact in the outcome here in Arizona, because as many people are aware, President Trump, even before he became president, spoke rather insultingly of McCain, derogatorily, saying, I don't like people who were taken prisoner during wartime. And McCain, of course, was a decorated hero of the Vietnam War and spent many years in confinement in North Vietnam. And his widow, Cindy McCain, came out a couple of weeks ago and said that she would be voting against Donald Trump. So I think all of that had something to do with Trump's loss in Arizona, as well as massive demographic changes. It's a very rapidly growing state. It has a very large Latino and Native American population. And many, many people have been moving to places like Phoenix and Flagstaff and Tucson from other places around the country, bringing their own brand of politics with them. So all in all, we have here, something of a historic moment in American politics amidst all of the confusion, the obscurity, the uncertainty as to what is going to happen next. At least we know one thing, that Arizona is no longer the solidly Republican state it once was.
All right, we shall see, Rob, how that factors into the final outcome. For the time being, thanks very much. Rob Reynolds there in Los Angeles. Well, both Trump and Biden have come out to speak in the last few hours. We can go to our correspondents, Kimberly Halkett and Mike Hanna, who've been standing by with us and been there all night. Mike Hanna is in Wilmington in Delaware. We'll go live to him shortly. But first, let's go to our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett in Washington, D.C. And Kimberly, we heard from Donald Trump. We'd heard from him via tweet initially, and then he came out and spoke at the White House, basically accusing the Democrats of trying to disenfranchise those voters who had voted for him.
That's absolutely right. The U.S. president claiming victory, saying that what is being conducted right now is nothing short of an attempt to disenfranchise the votes of conservative Americans who supported him in the 2020 poll. The president, speaking from the East Room of the White House, told about 150 supporters that were assembled there that what they had been doing was planning a victory party when they realized that suddenly the counting of ballots had been cut off.
So, Kimberly, so we were hoping to get a little bit of sound from Donald Trump there, but we'll come to that in a little bit. In the meantime, so what does that mean for the situation across the United States? When Donald Trump is saying these things, there's a pretty febrile atmosphere in the country as it is, a lot of division and so forth. How many concerns are there about this? I mean, this is exactly what everybody was frightened of, isn't it?
Yeah, the clip that we were going to play essentially says that the U.S. president is accusing Democrats of committing what he called fraud on our nation. He says that we did win this election, and what is happening, he believes, is that Democrats are now trying to find ballots. So he has said very clearly that he is planning to go to the Supreme Court. Now, I can tell you that I've covered a contested election in the past. It happened in 2000, and it involved one state, the state of Florida. And ultimately, it did get to the Supreme Court after a lot of ballot counting. It was an election that was ultimately declared in December. What makes this different and worse is the fact that we're talking about multiple states, potentially. So there could be multiple legal challenges. And what makes it perplexing is that the U.S. president is talking about going straight to the Supreme Court. What he's trying to do, he says, is halt the ballot counting because he has little confidence that with each passing day that he will win this election. So what's unusual about this is that he is sort of skipping the process that we know is an avenue for a contested election. It would involve counts, recounts, potentially involving the House of Representatives voting. But the president seems to be going straight to the Supreme Court. It's unclear what the legal argument is going to be for doing so. But the reason he wants to do that is because he has just freshly appointed a Supreme Court justice and shifted the balance of the court decidedly conservative. Who does that favor? Donald Trump, if that is going to be the ultimate decider of this election. So that is the path that Donald Trump is choosing to take. Very quickly, what we should also point out, though, is that we know that there are going to be extensive legal battles, both sides amassing a team of lawyers. This isn't a surprise. Many people hoped it could be avoided, but it appears here we are.
Kimberly, as ever, you were ahead of the game. We didn't have that Donald Trump clip lined up, but we do now. So let's have a little listen.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We want all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list.
Kimberly, and very quickly, it was interesting, wasn't it? Because amongst all the states that he was listing there that were on his side, he was saying that Arizona was still very much possible, but that is not now the case, we know.
Yeah, and he's also been kind of characteristically Donald Trump going, well, I didn't need it anyway. I didn't really need Arizona because I'm still going to win Pennsylvania. I'm going to win Michigan. I'm all these other states where we know it could be some time before the ballots are counted. So Donald Trump is striking an optimistic tone. But again, there's no question that that loss bothered him. In fact, we know so. We are insiders at the White House, including our senior White House producer, Chris Sheridan, have said very plainly that the president was furious to hear that his favorite news network, Fox News, was calling the state of Arizona for Biden because this is certainly something that he felt should have been in his corner. And of course, we know now is not.
Kimberly, thank you very much for that. Back with you as the morning draws on there. Let's go to Kamal Santamaria. You've got something up your sleeve for us.
I have. Yes. Bounding on to say it again because we've got another projection which just keeps the clock ticking, if you like, or the numbers ticking for Joe Biden, certainly. State of the race right now, 238 plays 213. And right up in the top northeast corner, it is the state of Maine that we are looking at. The projected winner in the state of Maine is Joe Biden with 3 electoral college votes. Now, bear with me whilst I get this absolutely correct. In Maine, remember this is one of the exceptions, there are 4 electoral college votes available there. 3 have gone to Joe Biden, winning each district. And then you have 1 left, which is the northern part of Maine, which there is a belief that may go to Donald Trump. So at the moment, we can give 3 to Joe Biden. And in the state of this race, 3 votes is incredibly significant. Of course it is. Then just a reminder about what was it 10 minutes ago now, we had this, a projected win in Arizona for Joe Biden with 11 electoral college votes there. And the important thing there was that that was the first state to flip all night long. So what does it do to the map? Bring it back again, and we'll talk a little bit more about scenarios now. So that is our state of the race as it is, 238, 213. So let's say Nevada, Biden needing 32 at this point to get over the line. Let's say he gets Nevada, which we would think, that's 6, so that takes him up to 244. At this point now, 20, oh my gosh, my maths is just terrible at the moment, 26 shy. So then it becomes Pennsylvania and Michigan or Georgia. Basically, there are a lot more paths to 270 for Joe Biden at the moment than there are for Donald Trump. If Donald Trump wants to do it, he is looking at Georgia and North Carolina, which is likely, I'd say North Carolina is likely for President Trump. Georgia, probably yes as well, though Joe Biden's still in the race there. But then President Trump will still need Pennsylvania and Michigan, and maybe one more as well. There are more paths for Joe Biden at this stage, and that is why those 3 electoral college votes, which he's just picked up in Maine, Nick, I think are very important, because it's incremental at this stage, baby steps. A big one, a Pennsylvania or something, will obviously make a difference, but either candidate will take absolutely everything they can get at the moment.
Sure. So more paths for Biden, but there is a clear route for both, basically.
Clear route for both, but yes, Donald Trump's position is holding states. He's just lost one, remember, Arizona. He might need to flip Nevada, and he'd need to hold on to his other states that he broke in 2016, the blue wall, as we keep talking about. Joe Biden can now afford to lose one of those, probably Wisconsin, and still do it with Pennsylvania and Michigan. So it's a little bit clearer for Joe Biden. I'm not going anywhere.
No, well, who knows?
Okay?
Who knows? But thanks for that, Kamal. That's great. Thanks very much. Let us cross to Mike Hanna, who's in Wilmington in Delaware, Joe Biden's home state, where he also spoke to supporters. And Mike, so we heard from President Trump a bit earlier, and he was responding, in fact, to Joe Biden, the former vice president, who had been addressing his supporters. Tell us a little bit about what he had to say.
Well, the margins now are so slim that those 3 electoral college votes that we've just heard about in Maine may well be the tipping point. But just to put all of this into a perspective, there have been some 130 million votes tallied at this particular point. That leaves, according to the projected amount of votes registered overall, there's some 30 million votes still out there. So this competition is far from over, and that's what Joe Biden said to his supporters when he arrived here at the convention center behind me at about midnight. He made a brief speech in which he insisted that the supporters must be patient. He indicated that the result's going to take a period of time. He correctly said at that stage he's confident of getting Arizona. He made the assumption as well that he was doing exceedingly well in those blue states, the blue wall, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Now, as Kamal was pointing out there, the path for Biden is still much easier than the path for Trump to achieve the presidency. But this is going to take a while, hence the call for patience. But this is what Joe Biden had to say.
I'm here to tell you tonight, we believe we're on track to win this election. We knew because of the unprecedented early vote and the mail-in vote that it was going to take a while. We're going to have to be patient until the hard work of tallying the votes is finished. And it ain't over till every vote is counted, every ballot is counted. But we're feeling good.
Well, there we heard from Joe Biden. It ain't over till every vote is counted, and that is what will be happening in the days ahead. The Supreme Court has already ruled that Pennsylvania, in particular, has until Friday at 5 p.m. to finish counting those absentee and postal votes. Now, these are the key votes. And importantly for Joe Biden and his campaign is that throughout this election, the trend has been very clear as the results have come in, is that postal and absentee votes have favored Democrats. The in-person voting, the on-the-day voting has favored Republicans. Now, those votes still to be counted are the mail-in absentee votes. Those are expected to favor the Democrats. So from that statistic alone, it appears that Joe Biden is right to call for patience, and his optimism may not be unfounded, just as Donald Trump's claims of victory may be entirely premature.
Mike Hanna in Wilmington in Delaware, thank you for that. Let's speak to Peter Matthews, who's a professor of political science at Cypress College and the author of Dollar Democracy, joins us now from Los Angeles. Peter, so margins, as Mike was just saying there, are very, very slim, aren't there? And meanwhile, we have Donald Trump saying that the election is being stolen, Joe Biden saying just hold the faith. How do you assess where we're at right now?
Well, it's absolutely slim at this point, but there are many, many votes. Like you said, about 30 million votes to be counted. And these states like Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are critical. And most of those votes in those states were cast through the mail or early in the ballot box or the drop-off boxes. They were the early votes, and those were overwhelmingly Democratic votes. And that's why Joe Biden is absolutely correct in saying, hold on, but also on principle. In the United States of America, we believe in counting every vote. Every vote has to be counted as part of our democratic tradition. And this is the first president, the first presidential candidate, Mr. Trump. President Trump was saying that the election's over today. This is the election day, so it's over. Don't count the votes that came in even before the election day had come about, because we have early voting in the United States, in many states. He's saying don't count those. You can't do that. That's unconstitutional. The U.S. Supreme Court already decided that Pennsylvania has every right to pursue its state law. According to it, it can count till Friday. And those votes are mostly going to be Democratic votes. Now, Mr. Trump could end up winning the election, but he needs to let every single vote be counted, because that's the rule of law principle.
Right. Peter, what do you think this says about democracy in the United States? And what are your concerns about how this might develop out on the streets?
You know, this is a real problem because of the fact that our election system is state by state, and that's how the country was founded, as a confederation initially, and then the federal system. But originally the states were more important, they were more powerful, and they came together as independent units to form one union. And so the states had the greatest amount of power over the actual electoral process, the election itself. And states vary state by state in certain ways in terms of the details of how the votes are cast, how they're counted. And so you should let the states have the preponderance of say here. And only once in a while the Supreme Court will step in if there's something that's untoward regarding federal constitutional principles from the federal Constitution. But it's basically a vote counting, and voting itself is a state function. And it's something that it can produce disjointed results at times, as it did back in 2000. There was controversy. It needs to be streamlined. The whole system needs to be streamlined, in my view. And then also the question of the Electoral College. Many people say that we don't even need an Electoral College anymore, because people are informed. They can be informed through the media, and they can have direct voting democracy of the people themselves choosing the president, as most democratic countries do in their own right. We're still on this system of Electoral College where actually last time President Trump won a minority of the popular vote and still became president with a majority of the Electoral College vote. That's not a one-person, one-vote democratic principle. So that needs to be looked at very carefully also.
Yeah, and Peter, as we've been hearing, all this could well come down to Pennsylvania. The Supreme Court has ruled that Pennsylvania has until Friday to count all the votes, but all the while we have 3 justices on the Supreme Court indicating that they may yet revisit that decision. Could you see a scenario whereby the votes are not counted in Pennsylvania?
I would hope this doesn't come to place, because it would be delegitimize the system in the eyes of many voters, especially the voters who cast those votes and don't get those votes counted. That's an egregious violation of democratic principle of the United States Constitution, that every person's vote has to count. In fact, we had a civil war about that when African Americans were not allowed to vote, not allowed to be citizens, and the United States had a civil war to settle that score. It took many years beyond that to finalize it, but now that everyone can vote, formally speaking, who's eligible to vote, you've got to count every vote. And I hope the Supreme Court does not revisit this. They've already made the decision to allow the Pennsylvania rulings to stand. And I think the new court, which means you have an added member who President Trump appointed, Judge or Justice Amy Coney Barrett, that's clearly a situation where he's getting a personal advantage by someone that he personally appointed. So I think the court that was in place when the election took place should be the court ruling that stands. And that was the court ruling that said, let Pennsylvania votes be counted. And so I don't think that President Trump should have tried to appeal this. I'm not even sure he has the legal standing to appeal it himself. He may have to go through the state courts and through the states themselves if this becomes a controversy. But the president should really leave this alone and let democracy work, so he can feel like he really won this election, that he didn't just take it.
Yes, so many twists and turns to go yet in this election story. Peter Matthews, for the time being, thanks very much. Do appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Well, I tell you what, it's now become clear that the states that will decide this election are the last remaining ones in the Midwest. Let's hear now from John Hendren, who's following them from Chicago.
Once again, it seems to come down to those blue wall states. Those are the states that Barack Obama won in, from Pennsylvania to Minnesota. In between are the key states of Wisconsin and Michigan. All of those states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, were Democratic states that went for Donald Trump in 2016. They put him over the top. Michigan was won by just 10,000 votes. And the votes that are left to be counted are the votes in the early voting that happened before the election. The Democrats believe that those heavily tilt toward Joe Biden and that will help put them over the top in the end. And in Wisconsin, it's the urban votes that haven't yet been counted. The biggest city, Milwaukee, also Kenosha, the city of Kenosha, has yet to be counted, while the county around it has been counted. And then there are the suburban and swing areas like Door County, which tends to vote for the eventual winner. Those votes have yet to be counted, and those are states that until Donald Trump was elected had not voted for a Republican for president since the 1980s. So it could be days before we hear what happens in Michigan. In Wisconsin, there is a law that says the poll workers have to stay there and count every vote until all the ballots are counted. And the folks there have told us that they expect to have an answer early Wednesday, that is 5, 6, 7 in the morning. That could be 11 Greenwich Mean Time or slightly later than that. So we're still waiting on those votes. But in the end, it comes down to the blue wall that decided it for Obama, decided it for Trump, and will decide likely this election as well.
Well, Florida was a hotly contested state too, and a big one, and it voted for Donald Trump. Andy Gallagher is in Miami. He's got more from there.
When you look at where I'm standing now, this is Miami-Dade County, and you look at how Biden did among the Latino vote here, and it was extremely poor when you compare it to how Hillary Clinton did with the same community back in 2016. It seems to me that the president's push to paint Joe Biden as a socialist worked. We already knew that about 1 million of the Cuban Americans that lived in a city like this in Miami would likely vote Republican. But it seems like a lot of Latino and Hispanic voters who didn't vote for Trump last time did so this time. Now, the margin by which Trump won this state was still pretty slim. In 2016, he won by about 112,000 votes. It's about 350,000 this time around. But the picture is very clear. This was a state that Trump needed to keep his hopes alive in this presidential election, to get another 4 years in the White House. 29 electoral college votes really do matter for the president.
And another state that Donald Trump really needed was Texas, a big state with a lot of electoral votes. And like Florida, they're all going to Donald Trump. Heidi Jo Castro is in Houston. And Heidi, it was an unexpectedly tight race in Texas in the end, wasn't it?
That's right. It was a tighter than normal race, with Trump leading by about 6 percentage points, even as the last results are still being reported. And his win comes as no surprise here. Texas is one of the most deeply red states in the country, having supported only Republican presidential candidates for more than 4 decades. So certainly Trump's narrowing margin of victory here in Texas tonight is indicative that the state continues on its trajectory toward becoming a true swing state. We've seen that driven by demographic changes in Texas, with more Latino voters, more young voters, immigrants turning out for Democrats. This year, though, that was not enough to overcome the Texas rural firewall that Trump had been counting on. He had predicted a tremendous victory here in Texas, and his supporters delivered a victory to him. The big question now is, given what we just heard the president say at the White House, his prematurely declared victory, saying that he would challenge any result that is adverse to him, the question is, how would some of his most fervent supporters in places like rural Texas, how would they react? Texas has counties that voted for Trump, looking at the returns now, with more than 90% margin of victory. Just imagine that. These are some of the most deeply red counties in the country. These are places where you might find militia of the right wing. And so there's certainly more concern and tension on the ground here, as authorities have already been prepping for possible civil unrest as the tension continues here, even as Democrats in Texas are celebrating the progress that they've seen in the growth of their base in this state.
And Heidi, what kind of things have you seen as authorities have been preparing for a potential civil unrest? What's been happening?
Sure, we know that the police chief in Austin, Texas, which is the brightest blue spot of Democratic-controlled area in the state, they have been preparing for civil unrest. We know President Trump's remarks, of course, they happen in the middle of the night here, around 1 a.m. local time. So it's still to be determined exactly how people may respond to that when they wake up in the mornings and hear it. But there is cause for concern given the last week of campaigning we saw here that did get contentious and even violent at moments. There were incidents where a Trump train, a caravan of some 100 of his supporters tried to surround a Biden campaign bus, almost forcing it off a road. The police had to get involved. There have been definitely clashes as far as verbal altercations that I've seen here in Houston outside of polling locations between Trump supporters and Democrats. So in this state where Democrats are normally so used to losing and Republicans are so used to winning big, the fact that this margin of victory is so close, and of course the fact that Trump has made his rather incendiary remarks from the White House, that may not bode well come tomorrow morning.
Heidi, thanks very much indeed for that. Heidi Castro there in Houston. Let's move from Texas to Pennsylvania, one of the states most likely to decide the presidential election. Still don't know who's going to get it. Kristen Salumi there in Philadelphia for us. And Kristen, you're right there in the thick of what could be the final countdown state. Donald Trump suggesting that he's pretty much got Pennsylvania wrapped up. Is that true?
Well, the vote totals that we have so far, with about 74% or exactly 74% of the votes being reported, is Donald Trump leading 56% to Joe Biden's 43%. That's about 700,000 votes. It's a substantial lead. But to put that into perspective, soon after Donald Trump all but declared victory here and around the country, Governor Tom Wolf of Pennsylvania sent out a tweet pointing out that there are still 1 million mail-in ballots to be counted here in Pennsylvania. He says, "I promised Pennsylvanians that we would count every vote, and that's what we're going to do." He called this a partisan attack. Places that have yet to fully report their vote counts include urban centers like here in Philadelphia, where I am, and Pittsburgh, which are strongly Democratic. Democrats also were submitted 3 times more mail-in ballots than Democrats did. So it is still conceivable that Joe Biden could win here. And this is actually the scenario that people were talking about and Democrats were worried about, that President Trump would look like he was leading early on because he would do better with on-the-day voting, whereas the Democrats would do better with the mail-in votes, which take longer to count. Here in Pennsylvania, they only started counting those ballots today. President Trump has been railing against the counting of ballots after the election, and Republicans here have been filing lawsuits wherever they see an opening over various issues in various counties, including a decision by the state Supreme Court that the ballots could continue to be counted 3 days after the election. Ballots that arrive within 3 days after the election could continue to be counted. That case is still pending, and the Supreme Court could actually be weighing in on that. All of this, of course, causing lots of anxiety and uncertainty. You were just talking with Heidi about the possibility of civil unrest. That's been a concern here in Pennsylvania as well. And we were just driving around the city and seeing police on pretty much every street corner around City Hall here. No protesters or demonstrators on the streets at this point, however. But tomorrow morning, well, actually, it is morning here already. In a few hours after the sun rises, ballots will again begin to be counted. And while poll workers are resting, the ballots are being guarded in a safe place, the governor tells us. And this will all pick up again in the morning. The race results could take several days, he said. He's saying it's more important for people to be patient and for us to get this right, but he's promising that will happen. Every vote will be counted, and just urging everyone to be patient.
All right, Kristen, thanks very much indeed. That's a picture in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. We're going to whip across to St. Paul in Minnesota because with so many legal questions floating around, we want to bring in Richard Painter, who's a former chief ethics lawyer for President George W. Bush. He's also a professor at the University of Minnesota Law School. Richard Painter, welcome to the program. First up, so Donald Trump, he wants to stop the vote counting. Can he?
No. President Trump cannot stop the vote counting. The vote counting is determined under state law, and many of these states, including Pennsylvania, have provided that the votes shall be counted at least up through Friday, the votes that are received from the mail-in ballots. They also have not counted all of the votes that were cast today. In the United States, as in most representative democracies, after we vote, we count every single vote. And the president, nobody else, can go into court and simply stop the counting of the votes. When it comes to recounts and how many recounts you have, yes, there can be some legal questions, as we had with Bush versus Gore in 2000, about how many recounts and when you do the recounts and so forth. But the idea of stopping the vote counting now is absolutely ridiculous.
So we're now sort of entering the legal weeds, aren't we, on the brink of extensive litigation. Just tell us a little bit about the process, where it will take place and both sides being involved and so forth.
Well, if President Trump chooses to go to court tomorrow or the next few days, I think he's just going to be rebuffed. The votes will be counted. They may try to disqualify some votes, and then we'll see what happens at the courts. He also may try to persuade the Republican-controlled legislature in the state of Pennsylvania to side with him and to refuse to certify the electors for Pennsylvania if they happen to be set for Joe Biden, if Biden wins that state. There are a number of tricks that could be tried by President Trump here, but what's most frightening is his announcement tonight that he's won the election when there's just simply no evidence at this point based on which we could declare that either candidate has won the election. It's just absolutely rubbish for either one of the candidates to claim to have won, and then to claim that if the result is any different, that somehow the election is being stolen. This is the type of talk that encourages violence, and it's just not consistent with the values of a representative democracy.
Yeah, so not so much about stopping the vote count, but more a rallying cry to his base. Where do you think, what are your fears about where that could lead?
Well, we'd see what happens. I mean, yes, there's some violent people out there on the extreme right, as there are on the extreme left, certainly looking for trouble. But I believe that the vast majority of the American people are going to stand by the fundamental principle in a democracy that after you've cast the votes, you count every single vote, and then whoever wins the election in each state gets the electors from that state to go to the Electoral College and choose the next president. We have a system set forth in our Constitution, and we need to abide by it. I believe the vast majority of the American people, Republican and Democrat, are going to insist that we stick to the process.
Now, Pennsylvania, as you know, it's been ruled that Pennsylvania can continue the vote count until Friday. But we also know that 3 justices on the Supreme Court have indicated that they may yet revisit that decision, i.e. they might reverse it. If they did, what would be your reaction to that?
Well, they might, but I would be very surprised, very, very surprised to see the justices of the United States Supreme Court reverse state law. It's very clearly set forth in Pennsylvania state law, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court agrees that that's an enforceable law. For the United States Supreme Court to come in and say something different would be really quite shocking, particularly if the justice just appointed to the court by President Trump, Amy Coney Barrett, were to vote in Donald Trump's favor and overturn the rulings of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. But of course, here we're many steps ahead of ourselves. I believe we're going to count every vote. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court would have a first crack at that issue. And as I say, I don't see the Supreme Court of the United States simply handing this election to Donald Trump, even though he has appointed 3 of those justices on the court.
Richard Painter, thanks very much indeed. Richard Painter joining us from St. Paul in Minnesota.
Well, thank you very much.
Now, Donald Trump's presidential win 4 years ago was partly down to a key group of voters, white suburban women. But as he bids for another term in office, it is unclear whether he has what it takes to secure their votes this time round. Rosalind Jordan has this report.
It's the first rule of running for office. Ask the people for their vote. But begging for support this close to Election Day? That might be a sign of desperation.
Suburban women, will you please like me? Remember? Please. Please. I saved your damn neighborhood, okay?
Donald Trump's campaign is faced with a problem. Polls say the president is losing a key part of his base, suburban white women voters, to his Democratic rival Joe Biden. In a recent Washington Post poll, 62% said they were planning to vote for Biden versus just 34% for Trump.
You know, instead of just being a candidate and having the candidate's record to run on, we have 4 years of a Trump record. These women, I think, largely view as a failure on a number of levels. And I think that's going to kind of encourage them to show up and make sure we don't have another 4 years of that.
Political experts say in 2016, Republican women overlooked Trump's misogyny because they liked his conservative economic policy. But this year, these voters are alarmed by the collapse of the economy, as well as by Trump's apparent stoking of racial tensions in the country. They say what matters most is the president's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic.
He has really lost that group of women with their concerns over the coronavirus, the health of their families. Women are more burdened by the child care, by the educational difficulties, by their parents being in situations. So he has lost a lot of this support, and it may make the difference for him.
Women's suffrage was born from a desire to...
The Trump campaign strategy, reminding women that the Republican Party fought for their right to vote 100 years ago.
And with one unified voice, we will vote for freedom.
Joe Biden said he's absolutely...
And resurrecting the party's racially inflammatory law and order message of the 1970s and 1980s.
I'm sorry that there is no one here to answer your emergency call.
If you elected this guy, the suburbs would be overwhelmed with violence and crime.
Meantime, Biden supporters see their chance to win over Republican women.
We want you to grow up proud and strong in an America that believes in you.
And to a return to civil political discourse.
They'd fight like hell on the floor, and then they'd go eat lunch together because they always put their friendship and their country first.
The party that's going to win over these moderate voters and these suburban women voters is the party that's able to prove that it's really going to unify the country and help us heal after all the trauma that we've been dealing with for the past 4 years.
The suburban housewife line is getting Donald Trump applause.
You know what women want more than anything else? They want safety, security, and they want to be able to have their houses and leave me alone, right?
Whether that applause translates into votes for the president won't be known until Election Day. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Well, there's still a lot that is unknown. Let's speak to Mark Jacobson, who's a former advisor to Defense Secretary Ash Carter. He's now Assistant Dean at the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs. That's at Syracuse University. He joins us now from Washington, D.C. So first up, we are now, it seems, in the midst of this contested election. And you do wonder where it will end if there is no resolution in the courts. Previously contested elections have only been resolved when the aggrieved party has walked away. I'm thinking of Richard Nixon in 1960, when John F. Kennedy came to power. And then also, of course, back in 2000 with Al Gore.
Yeah, and in fact, if you go back to the very dawn of the United States, the election of 1800 was the first presidential election to be contested, and that actually had to go to the House of Representatives for resolution. This is the famous election, for those in the U.S. who've seen the show Hamilton. This is where Thomas Jefferson had the same number of electoral votes as his Democratic Republican opponent, Aaron Burr. But there are traditions, and some of those traditions are very important to understanding why contested elections still end up in the peaceful transition of power to the next president in line. And one of those is all the votes are counted. In 2000, with Bush v. Gore, it took over a month before a decision was made. And while that was disruptive to the United States, while it was full of partisan rancor and bickering and arguing back and forth, and a Supreme Court case that, as Richard Painter noted, wasn't entirely viewed as the right decision by all, it was done. It was a process that was handled through the courts, and it ends up in a peaceful transition of power. What worries people about 2020 is, of course, that U.S. society is much more polarized. We've gone through an election that was not viewed by some as being legitimate and certainly had its own dose of foreign interference. And that's only exacerbated the divide in the United States. And alongside disturbances after things such as the George Floyd murder, well, then you have a recipe for some civil unrest. And that's really the big concern if this ends up being contested. Is it contested in a civil manner, or is it contested in a way that results in tempers boiling over in the streets?
Right. Do you think there could be a route to a quick resolution? Could it be that all votes could be counted in the coming days, without endless litigation and potential problems on the streets?
Still at 3:30 in the morning on the East Coast, yes, there is still potential for a quick resolution. Arizona is probably going to go for Biden, but now it has gone for Biden. Michigan, now. Wisconsin. Yes, I know AP's called it for Biden. I think NBC's holding off, being a little skittish, but you still have the opportunity that if Biden can win a couple more states, Wisconsin and Michigan, for example, or certainly Pennsylvania and Michigan or Wisconsin, or ekes out something in Georgia, you may actually have him over the top at 270, and then I think the court cases are less likely to be contentious. Pennsylvania, if it comes down to just Pennsylvania, President Trump's already signaled that he wants to go to the Supreme Court right away. Well, it's not quite how it works. There are a lot of steps in between, but if it comes down to Pennsylvania, this could last several weeks or a month. But we still have that narrow opportunity for this to be resolved, I would say, by the weekend. I'm hopeful, but I'm not confident that it will be.
You do kind of wonder, don't you, that even if Joe Biden were to win, I mean, the word loser is not in Donald Trump's vocabulary. Would he ever concede?
I do think he will eventually, but I'm less worried about that, but more worried about the fact that if Joe Biden wins, it is clear that we are a divided nation right now. It's not that we're divided over which candidate we think will make the better leader. It's that we're divided over whether or not COVID, again, 250,000 dead, we're divided over whether COVID is a serious issue. We're divided over the economy. We're divided over what we think are the priorities in this nation. And that's going to make it, alongside, it looks like, more so than earlier this evening, it looks like it will be a Republican Senate. Then you have a President Biden, Speaker Pelosi in the House, and a Mitch McConnell who has been an obstructionist to Democratic presidents in the past. And I worry about that because this is not a time for American government to be at loggerheads with each other. There are things that must be done most immediately on coronavirus, and secondly, things that are done structurally to make sure everyone is enfranchised and to make sure that the level of angst and anger in this nation, particularly along racial lines, can be healed. And that's going to be hard if the Senate, the House, and the presidency are not working together.
Interesting. Given what the polls were saying, and given what you've just been talking about, given COVID and given the racial unrest and so forth, given the impeachment, are you surprised that things are this close?
I'm going to go a step further. For me, personally, I'm disappointed. You have a president who has been impeached. You have a president who's never gotten close to winning 50% of the popular vote, and a president who, even if you supported him with everything else, and agreed with his policies, utterly failed at controlling the coronavirus. And granted, there's certainly a lot of blame to be placed on Beijing for not cooperating early on, for allowing this to get out, et cetera, et cetera. But there is no doubt that the U.S. failure, a continued failure when it comes to the inability to provide PPE to the hospitals that need them. We still have, even in Wisconsin, which seems to be split down the middle right now, you have hospitals on the verge of being overwhelmed. And it's been almost a year, and we still don't have this under control. And there are 60 million plus people who still think, well, it's okay to have that person be our leader. And it is so incredibly disappointing to someone like me who spent a life not just in public service as a civilian, but in uniform, defending the ideals of this nation and working with my European counterparts for over a decade on trying to find ways that we could work together to solve the problems of other nations that look like they were failing states. So, yes. Am I surprised? Yes, and I'm disappointed.
I have to say, just to counter that, there is a significant proportion of the population who would disagree with you, perhaps a winning proportion indeed. But Mark Jacobson, thank you for your perspective. Thanks a lot. Now, Donald Trump and Joe Biden are the two oldest presidential nominees in American history, and that means their running mates have become more important than ever. Mike Pence and Kamala Harris couldn't be more different from their politics to their personalities. Mohammed Jamjoon has more.
Senator Harris and Vice President Pence, thank you for being here.
When Vice President Mike Pence and Senator Kamala Harris took to the debate stage in October, viewers around the world witnessed a study in contrasts.
But when you say what the American people have done over these last 8 months hasn't worked, that's a great disservice to the sacrifices the American people have made.
So let's talk about caring about the American people. The American people have had to sacrifice far too much because of the incompetence of this administration.
On the Republican side, 61-year-old Vice President Mike Pence, who over the past 4 years has proven himself President Donald Trump's most loyal ally. Known for his opposition to abortion, the former governor of Indiana is an evangelical Christian and champion of the religious right. Critics say Pence has been a driving force in the Trump administration's efforts to roll back protections for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. Before being chosen as Trump's running mate in 2016, Pence had openly questioned some of Trump's policies. After joining the ticket, though, Pence transformed into an adept second-in-command who always deferred to his boss.
Because thanks to your leadership from early on, not only are we bringing a whole-of-government approach to confronting the coronavirus, we're bringing an all-of-America approach.
Even as head of the White House coronavirus task force, Pence wouldn't let the news that members of his team had tested positive for COVID-19 keep him off the campaign trail. Continuing to campaign for Trump, even as public health officials criticized the decision.
Greetings, America.
On the Democratic side, 56-year-old Senator Kamala Harris. The daughter of immigrants from Jamaica and India, Harris, in 2016, became the first South Asian American and second African American woman elected to the U.S. Senate, where she represents the state of California. In 2020, as the Democratic vice presidential nominee, she became the first woman of color to be included on a major party's presidential ticket.
That I am here tonight is a testament to the dedication of generations before me. Women and men who believed so fiercely in the promise of equality, liberty, and justice for all.
Known as one of the toughest interrogators in Congress, Harris has repeatedly used skills honed during her tenure as a prosecutor and a former Attorney General of California while questioning Trump administration officials. During Harris's short-lived presidential campaign, critics questioned her shifting positions on policy issues and her record as prosecutor. But as a barrier-breaking running mate to Joe Biden, Harris, an advocate for racial and social justice, has proven popular. With supporters applauding Harris's pledge to offer a path to citizenship to millions of undocumented immigrants living in the U.S. In the final weeks of the campaign, members of Harris's team also tested positive for COVID-19. After learning the news, Harris temporarily stopped traveling. A bracing reminder that, for America's 2020 vice presidential candidates, differences in politics, policy, and personality could not be more stark. Mohammed Jamjoon, Al Jazeera.
We're going to head over to the White House and Kimberly Halkett, our correspondent. Kimberly, I just want to take a pause and just kind of assess where we're at. It's all started moving at a breakneck pace. What's your assessment of how things stand right now?
Well, where things stand, in a sentence, is we don't have a winner. And I've been thinking about this in the last couple of hours. And the fact that we don't have a winner, obviously both men want to win. But if you pull back from this, I've been thinking about this is a bit of a failure for the Democratic Party, because this was a referendum on Donald Trump and his policies. And given the fact that here in the United States, Donald Trump has had a barrage of negative media coverage. He is almost a dirty word in polite conversation. The fact that this election is even close is remarkable. And it speaks to not only where the American voter is, but maybe also some of the halls of power, journalists as well, and some of the rejection of that by the American public. It's remarkable that this is a close election, given the fact that not only has there been constant negative media coverage from CNN, from MSNBC, from the Washington Post at times, from the New York Times, some of the establishment pillars of American society. The fact that this is even close is remarkable, that Donald Trump has achieved this. But then you add on COVID-19 and the fact that the economy has been decimated, and still Donald Trump has hung on to a considerable amount of support. That is significant. Very quickly also, we've been talking about the presidential race mostly, but this is also a race for control of the Senate, which it appears Republicans have hung on to. And the majority leader, Mitch McConnell, we know that there was outside money to the tune of $100 million poured into that race, and still Democrats lost. So I feel that there's going to be a little bit of soul searching later on. We're not quite there yet. But there are a lot of takeaways from this for everyone. And I think that most of all, while people are focused on a winner, there are going to be a lot of lessons learned from the 2020 U.S. election.
Yes, there'll be a lot of Democrats wringing their hands. Kimberly Halkett, thanks a lot. Kimberly Halkett there in Washington, D.C. Well, Minnesota has been at the center of protests over racial injustice since the killing of George Floyd while in police custody in May. Natasha Gedane reports from there now.
We spent part of election evening here at the George Floyd Memorial. As you can hear, there was music, some dancing, food, and Al Jazeera English projected on a screen. Many of the young voters we spoke to say they voted for Biden, but only because they no longer want President Donald Trump in office. They don't believe that Biden will do much to address concerns over police brutality and advance racial equality in this country. Minnesota has been a Democratic, reliable Democratic source of support for almost 50 years. But Trump has been hoping to grab those 10 electoral college votes. He lost the state in 2016 by less than 45,000 votes. He viewed that as a missed opportunity and campaigned aggressively in the state, wallpapered the airwaves with his advertising. The Republican Party's strategy was to minimize losses in the progressive cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis, as well as the suburbs, and to drive up voting, really trying to get out the vote in the more rural, white, conservative parts of the state. You have 70% of the population of Minnesota living in urban areas, 30% of the population living in the more conservative, homogeneous areas of the state. There were many voters that, though they were sympathetic to the largest protest movement in history spawned by the death of George Floyd while in Minneapolis Police Department custody, were concerned about the violence and the looting that they saw in Minneapolis. And Trump's law and order message resonated with many of the voters that we spoke to when we went into rural Minnesota. One thing is certain, expect Minnesotans to be extremely engaged when it comes to voting. In the last election, more than 74% of eligible voters turned out to vote. It was the highest in the country.
All right, the media and social media have effectively become war zones during Donald Trump's presidency. He weaponized the term fake news to attack outlets he perceives as enemies. Here's Richard Gisbert, a presenter of our media analysis program, The Listening Post.
Donald Trump's inauguration set the tone. From that day, when he flat out lied about the size of the crowd, it was clear that the U.S. news media did not know what to make of the president's on-again, off-again relationship with the truth.
Series of, well, we have to label it untruths.
We now have a case where he's made another charge, and he has not got evidence. Why are we surprised?
It's such a racist question.
Until Donald Trump came along, the White House press corps had been reluctant to accuse any American president of lying. That is no longer the case. The Washington Post has counted how many times Trump has lied or misled Americans. The number is more than 22,000, forcing journalists to call it what it is.
This president is a serial liar, and he serially lied tonight.
How do you defend 22,000 falsehoods? By attacking and calling the media outlets reporting on them fake news.
The dishonest media.
Nobody has any idea how corrupt the media is. Well, I just think it's a nasty question.
One false story after another.
You are the enemy of the people. Quiet, quiet.
With this administration constantly misleading citizens, journalists have grown ever more reliant on leaks from disgruntled White House insiders, ex-insiders turned pundits, or ex-cabinet officials turned authors. Some of those leaks have proven to be misleading and have come back to bite the news outlets that bought into them. Remember Russiagate.
The allegations that Russia might have been gathering material, video of Mr. Trump that could be used to blackmail him.
Stories of Russian meddling in the 2016 election and allegations the Trump campaign and the Kremlin had worked together, complete with that sexy Cold War angle, were too much for news channels not named Fox to resist. The eventual retractions were damaging, since they lent the president's fake news narrative some credibility.
We're actually correcting a story that we have been reporting throughout the day today.
The U.S. media landscape, divided before Donald Trump was elected, has since grown far more polarized. In one corner, the liberal side, including outlets like CNN, MSNBC, and the New York Times. In the other, Fox News, broadcast upstarts like One America News, and conservative platforms such as the Christian Broadcasting Network and the Washington Times, which owe their resurgent audiences to the president. Time and again, Americans have seen those rival journalistic camps take the same news story and spin it in entirely different directions. The COVID-19 story has proven to be much harder for Fox and its ilk to manipulate, since there's no way to spin infection rates and mortality figures. If Donald Trump loses this election, prepare to see some journalists claiming at least some of the credit, calling it a victory for the Fourth Estate. Some of them will be justified to a certain extent. There are news outlets that have been locking horns with the president for years, producing some adversarial quality journalism along the way. But until 2020, they failed to really move the needle. In fact, fewer Americans trust their news media today than in 2016. What it took to sink Donald Trump in the polls was COVID-19 and the science, hard data. It doesn't lie. And try as he might, the president has no answer for that.
Hello there, I'm Nick Clark. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha. It is 0900 GMT. That is 4 a.m. in Washington, D.C. And after one of the most divisive and unpredictable U.S. elections in memory, the nation and the world still awaits a final result. Both candidates have spoken in the early hours of Wednesday, U.S. time. Joe Biden says when all the votes are finally counted, he does expect to come out on top. But President Donald Trump, he declared himself the outright winner and says he plans to ask the Supreme Court to help keep Democrats from trying to, quote, steal the election.
We want all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list, okay? It's a very sad moment. To me, this is a very sad moment, and we will win this, and as far as I'm concerned, we already have won it.
I'm here to tell you tonight, we believe we're on track to win this election. We knew because of the unprecedented early vote and the mail-in vote that it was going to take a while. We're going to have to be patient until the hard work of tallying the votes is finished. And it ain't over till every vote is counted. Every ballot is counted. But we're feeling good.
And what this means is that we've had to work Kamal Santamaria extremely hard.
I'm
and
glad
it keeps
he's
on going.
feeling good.
It keeps on going. So tell us where we're at with the numbers.
Okay. Yeah, okay, I'll do that. Sometimes we just need to get straight into it, don't we? Let's have a look at the state of the race. Right now, 238 against 213. The most recent calls have been for Joe Biden up in the northeast corner in Maine and then in Arizona as well. Arizona was the important one right here because it flipped, and it was the first state to do that. And Nevada, we're still waiting for. The expectation is that that would go blue as well. What we're going to do, though, is have a little focus on Wisconsin at this point, because Wisconsin, one of the states that put it was the state that put Donald Trump over the top 4 years ago. It's too close to call with its 10 electoral college votes, and that's why it's too close to call. The margin is only about 100,000 votes. Now, to put that into some sort of perspective, and again, this is using our split, if you like, between rural and urban areas. Urban area, Milwaukee County, biggest urban area, a hard blue area. Joe Biden is doing well there. I think he's about 60,000 votes ahead of Donald Trump at the moment, but there's still about half to be counted there. So that's why we can't call it at the moment, because we're still waiting to hear from, see what a large part of the urban population has done. In other urban parts, that is Green Bay and in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Kenosha, we know all about that, of course, from the protests earlier this year. Those areas Donald Trump is doing maybe a little better than expected, but not running away with it in those areas as well. So that's the difference in Wisconsin. That's why we can't call it, because that's just too close. Let's have a little look at how Wisconsin has looked in the past. Let me hop out the way and we'll get the shot of what happened in 2016, 48, 47. In fact, I think it might have even been less than that in the end, less than 1%. And that was how Donald Trump actually became president and went past 270. It was 23,000 votes in the end, which proved the difference. After, look at the change from 2012, where Barack Obama, my goodness, 7% was the change. 7% was the difference he had there, and it came down to less than 1%. So clearly still very tight again this year in Wisconsin. Just reminding you of the state of the race at the moment, 238. Other little things we can think about at the moment. Alaska, which will be 3 electoral college votes for Donald Trump when the time comes. And then our yellow states, Nevada, I would expect that to be blue. And then the rest, Nicholas? Your guess is as good as mine at this stage.
Who knows where it's going to go. But just to be clear, the counting has stopped right now in those states, or is it still going on?
In Wisconsin?
Yeah.
No, still. So, well,
the blue vote is going on, but then they'll resume tomorrow and we'll get more clarity tomorrow.
Exactly. And because it is such a densely populated urban area, there's going to be... This is why I must admit, I was talking to Gordon, our producer, about this earlier. It can be confusing. You know, when you see something saying 98% reported and you think, well, why can't we call that? It's more a case of 98% of precincts. Now, those 2% of precincts, they might be really big precincts.
Yeah.
So it could change completely on those precincts reporting, which is why we can't make the call.
And
I wish we could make the call.
All take some time. Kamal, thanks a lot. Thank you for that. Now, we have a team of reporters for you this hour. Rob Reynolds is in Los Angeles. Mike Hanna is in Biden's home state of Delaware. But first, let's go to our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett in Washington, D.C. Kimberly, a lot of people were talking about the blue wave that was going to sweep the United States. It didn't happen, did it?
No, it didn't. And the fact that we still don't have a winner is remarkable. What the sort of the headline that is on the Washington Post as Americans wake up and learn that there still is no winner in the 2020 presidential election, the headline is "A Nation Divided." And I think that sums things up pretty nicely. Now, we know that the U.S. president does not have any public events on his schedule for Wednesday. It's clear that there is a lot of strategizing, there we go, that is going on in the White House, in the Trump campaign, and we suspect Joe Biden's as well, which Mike Hanna will talk about, that really this is a race that is too close to call. We knew that this would be decided on a razor's edge, but what shocked the nation was the fact that the U.S. president came out and claimed victory. And the reason he's doing that is because he is trying to build a case that the voting needs to stop and the counting needs to stop, because we know that when it comes to counting ballots, if you stop, that favors Donald Trump. He believes that he has won this election. He has declared victory. But of course, this is something that will be contested. The question becomes the path that it will take. Now, we know that one of those paths could ultimately end up in the House of Representatives. That would not favor Donald Trump, because that is controlled by Democrats, and it appears that is the case still. So the president has already said that he's going to go straight to the Supreme Court, where we know that the Supreme Court leans decidedly conservative. So Donald Trump, in his mind, has already plotted the path to victory, but there is an established path that he is trying to circumvent, and certainly the battle becomes now, in an effort to try and do that, how things end up for the president.
So what actually happens now? What do we look for next?
We first have to look for an initial result, and then if it's close, what will happen is that we will see either camp challenging those results. So what we saw in 2000 was a recount. But this time in 2000, it only involved one state, the U.S. state of Florida. In 2020, we know that the U.S. state of Florida has gone for Donald Trump. But instead, we have a number of battleground states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, where this counting could go on for some time. And if it's challenged, there are going to be multiple recounts going on. So that is going to be the first step. I'm almost nervous to kind of look into the crystal ball and decide what goes beyond that, because we already know that what's going to happen are legal challenges, perhaps in tandem. So this is very much going to go to the courts, which, after covering Donald Trump for 4 years, I should tell you, is a standard piece of or page from Donald Trump's playbook, whether it was his tax returns, whether it was preventing members of his administration from testifying before congressional committees in the probe, and whether or not his 26th presidential campaign colluded with Russia. Donald Trump goes to court because he knows if he can draw things out in the courts, there is a chance of winning. It appears that's the strategy yet again as this president tries to win re-election.
Yeah, OK, just another quick one, Kimberly. It's something I was alluding to with Kamal just now. Does counting just continue through the night, or do they stop and take a pause at some point?
They stop and take a pause. We know for a fact that in a number of places, like Philadelphia, for example, they said, look, let everybody go home. We can count this in the morning. We know that this is going to have a significant impact on the result in Pennsylvania, a key battleground state, which I've been saying for days and weeks could ultimately decide this election. So, yes, they all go to bed. They pick it up in the morning. And we know that what they're counting, for the most part, are these mail-in ballots that are still also being received in some cases. And we know that there was an effort by the Trump administration to try and stop the counting of ballots received after November 3rd. But in most cases, what the courts have decided, and I'm speaking very broadly, is that if there is a postmark by November 3rd, this ballot will be counted. In some cases, this went to court, particularly in North Carolina, another important state. And we know the counting could continue up until November 12th. So this is really going to have an impact. We're going to be watching very carefully. But again, the longer the counting goes, more this favors Joe Biden. That's what Democrats are counting on. That's why we heard Donald Trump saying he wants to go to the Supreme Court to stop all of it, because he knows that the in-person voting favors his case.
Yep, well, we can see counting going on there right now. Not gone to bed there yet. But, Kimberly, thank you for that. Kimberly Hackett there at Washington,
in Philadelphia? DC. Really? Okay. Yeah. All right.
Just
That's
one
a surprise,
place. I'm
because
sure,
I heard in a number of places they had actually counted.
Right, I'm sure they'll be retiring soon and back at it a little bit later. Let's cross over to Mike Hanna in Wilmington in Delaware. That's Joe Biden's home state, of course. And Mike, so Joe Biden came out and spoke to his supporters, kind of preempting what he knew was to come from the president.
Well, Joe Biden came out basically calling on his supporters to be patient, well aware that this result is going to take a lot longer than may have been predicted, certainly at least until Friday, it would appear, at this particular stage in a state like Pennsylvania. But the claims of Donald Trump to victory in a number of states where votes have not been completed, where the counting has not been completed, as well as with his threat to plead to the Supreme Court to stop all voting immediately. Well, that's being contested very strongly by the Trump campaign within the last half hour. They've released a statement from Joe Biden's campaign manager saying that the president's statement tonight about trying to shut down the counting of duly cast ballots was outrageous, unprecedented, and incorrect. It's outrageous, continues the statement, because it's a naked effort to take away the democratic rights of the American citizen. So certainly a hard-hitting statement from the Biden campaign there. The campaign's been largely quiet during the counting of the votes, but then shortly after midnight we had the statement from Joe Biden arriving here at the Biden campaign headquarters in a convoy and then making a short address, asking them, as I said, to be patient, but also expressing confidence about still winning this election, of still taking a number of states, one of them Arizona, which it does appear he may have taken. The prediction there is that Biden won Arizona, absolutely critical in the wider context of the election. And to take that wider context a little bit further, Nick, one must understand that it's about 130 million votes that have so far been tallied. Now, according to most projections, there's still 30 million votes out there waiting to be apportioned to one of the candidates. Now, this is significant because the vast majority of those votes are the early voting forms, the absentee voting forms. These are the ones that are taking all the time to count. Now, the one thing that has become clear in this election, as in past ones, is that those mail-in votes, those absentee votes, tend to come from Democrats. The in-person vote comes from Republicans. That's been shown very clearly in the results through the day. So the key issue here is when those votes are counted, what is the result going to be? And we're still coming down to that blue wall. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, as we've been saying through the evening, the place where there are a lot of absentee votes, where this counting is still going on. And certainly this is going to be critical in the hours and days ahead, along with the myriad of legal challenges that are expected as the counting continues and concludes.
Yes, it could well be that Joe Biden could yet win, but there must be, and no doubt there will be, a great deal of disappointment in the Democratic ranks that this has ended up where it has right now.
Indeed, yes, there had been the hope among Democrats that states like Florida were in play, that states like Georgia, where we're still awaiting result, may have been declared a Biden state even earlier. Democrats were hoping for a virtual landslide. They were hoping for the results to put them in a place where victory could be claimed fairly early on in the evening, rather than dragging through right into the early hours of the morning and in days ahead. That being said, only one state has flipped, and that is Arizona, it would appear, according to the projections. So in that, the Democrats can take some comfort, but still there'd be great disappointment in their showing in Florida. There will be some hope for the future in their showing in Texas, where they narrowed the margin of Trump's apparent victory. But overall, this is less than what the Democrats had been expecting in terms of the result at this particular point in time, where with hours after the polls have closed, still no clear indication of who is going to win this election. But still, Democrats' hopes are open. And the one thing that did that was that projected victory in Arizona. That kept Biden not only alive, but with more options to get the necessary total of electoral college votes to seal the presidency, more options than President Trump, even at this particular stage.
All right, Mike, thanks for that. Mike Hanna there, reporting from Delaware. Let us now cross to California. Los Angeles, in fact. Rob Reynolds is there, the state with the biggest number of electoral votes. He's outside the Staples Center, which is a stadium that was turned into a voting center earlier in the day. So, Rob, first up, we're going to talk about the blue wall in a moment. But first, let's just quickly talk about Arizona, the state that flipped.
Yes, well, Arizona has been undergoing a great deal of demographic change over the past 4 years, and over the past decade, Phoenix is one of the fastest growing cities and metropolitan areas in the country. So a lot of people have come into what was formerly a solidly red state with their own political beliefs. And that changes the makeup of Arizona. In addition, there are demographic changes, a rising number of young Latino and Latina voters who tend towards Democrats. In part, that is because of President Trump's behavior with regard to immigration, with regard to the separation of families, and the whole story that we've seen play out, including the border wall, and all of these things have energized the Latino population in Arizona. So these are some of the reasons why it has flipped. I think there's another reason that a little more hard to quantify, but we all remember John McCain. He ran against Barack Obama unsuccessfully in 2008, but he was a target of criticism by then candidate Donald Trump, and even into Trump's presidency, and some disrespect shown to a man who was a real hero in Arizona politics. And that, I think, may have soured a number of Arizona Republicans who were McCain supporters and had fond memories of the late senator, and who may have decided that Trump was no longer acceptable as their leader. As I say, a little hard to quantify, Nick, but all of these factors, I think, coming together in Arizona resulted in what looks like a flip, the only flip of any state that we've seen in this election cycle, and perhaps a sign of how things are going in the Sun Belt, which was formerly and has been a Republican area of the United States.
All right, Rob, thanks for that. I'll talk to you about the blue wall a bit later. We've just run out of time and want to move on to our guest, but thanks for that. In the meantime, let's speak to Peter Matthews, who's a professor of political science at Cyprus College and the author of Dollar Democracy. He joins us now from Los Angeles. Peter, so how do you assess the current situation, given everything that's unfolded in the last couple of hours?
Pretty remarkable, but not entirely unexpected, because we knew it was going to be very close. We thought possibly that Biden could take a swing state like North Carolina. That's still not over yet. The counting is still going on. But the states you have to watch are the ones that still haven't counted the absentee vote and the early vote, and that's those three blue wall states. And if Trump can win one of those, it'll make it difficult for Biden to win. But I think there's a chance that Biden can win all those three states. And he also has won Arizona, as you pointed out, and he's got some more electoral votes out of Maine, I believe. So he's getting pretty close. But it's very unpredictable still. And yet it's not totally unexpected, because we know this was going to be very close.
What do you make of the president's intervention, effectively giving a victory speech, saying that most of the people have voted for him, so he should be president, and Joe Biden should accept that?
Totally unconscionable, unprecedented. No other candidate, Democrat or Republican, has ever said this ever in our history before. And it's just unacceptable. And he's really delegitimizing the American system and political system itself, and trying to disenfranchise so many millions of voters who voted in those early days legitimately. And by the way, I want to clarify something. There's not an ongoing vote. There's an ongoing count, and the count is legal in those states. The voting has already ended. It ended today. So we need to make that clear so people don't get confused with the two. The president's trying to confuse people by saying there's ongoing voting past the deadline. It's absolutely not true. So it's unconscionable what he's doing. He needs to settle down and be more calm about it, and be part of the rule of law principle that this country is based on, and to accept that, and accept defeat if he gets defeated, accept victory if he really wins the victory. That would be fine too. But he has to win it. He can't just grab it.
What we've seen has not been the Democratic blowouts that some polls were predicting. Where do you think the Democrats went wrong with this?
The tough answer there this early. We have to analyze the actual exit polls, for example. We have to look at the intricacies of the polling and where it may have gone wrong in the sampling, where there's some hidden Trump voters. That was also a big theory for a long time, and some of us thought it may be legitimate, that Many Trump voters did not want to admit they were going to vote for Trump, but they would vote for him anyway, as they did back in 2016. That could have happened again. So we don't know yet until we analyze it more carefully. And it is disappointing for some Democrats to have not won at least a state like North Carolina and possibly even Georgia, which could still happen, because don't forget, some of these areas are urban areas. This is Atlanta votes have not come in yet. They're going to start counting them tomorrow morning. And Atlanta is an urban area. It's heavily African American. It is more progressive than the rest of the state. And if those votes come in and President Trump now is only 2% ahead of Joe Biden in Georgia, it could make a difference. I think Democrats are a bit looking forward to that. I'm a little disappointed in not taking Georgia or not taking Florida. And certainly Texas looked pretty close there for a while. But I wouldn't be completely disappointed, because if Biden gets enough electoral votes to win, it's still very legitimate. He won the election. And I would probably going to predict that he'll probably win the popular vote as well.
Yeah, Florida was interesting, wasn't it? It seems as if that the Donald Trump message that a wave of socialism was about to sweep the United States resonated certainly with Latinos in Florida.
It did primarily with Latinos who are the Venezuelan Latino immigrants and the immigrant citizens who were from Cuba, who are mostly very conservative, more right-wing, very anti-communist in their own thinking. And I think Trump played up to this and tried to call Biden and his supporters socialists, or in some cases, who knows, maybe even communists. And it was egregious to mislabel someone like that. But, you know, we need to go back to the era when people debated each other. Parties actually had differences in real issues and ideology, and they debated it and accepted the defeat or accepted the argument one way or the other. That kind of democracy has to be returned in this country. We've strayed a long ways from that, and it's become name-calling and high-tech campaigning and advertising and Madison Avenue and even underhanded tactics to win at any cost. And that really causes democracy to suffer. It causes policy to suffer, and it causes the American people to suffer in the long run. That's not right. I hope it changes.
Peter Matthews, thank you for that. Great analysis. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
So Minnesota has been at the centre of protests over racial injustice since the killing of George Floyd while in police custody back in May. Natasha Goname is there and has this reaction from voters in Minneapolis.
We spent part of election evening here at the George Floyd Memorial. As you can hear, there was music, some dancing, food, and Al Jazeera English projected on a screen. Many of the young voters we spoke to say they voted for Biden, but only because they no longer want President Donald Trump in office. They don't believe that Biden will do much to address concerns over police brutality and advance racial equality in this country. Minnesota has been a Democratic, reliable Democratic source of support for almost 50 years. But Trump has been hoping to grab those 10 electoral college votes. He lost the state in 2016 by less than 45,000 votes. He viewed that as a missed opportunity and campaigned aggressively in the state, wallpapered the airwaves with his advertising. The Republican Party's strategy was to minimize losses in the progressive cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis, as well as the suburbs, and to drive up voting, really trying to get out the vote in the more rural, white, conservative parts of the state. You have 70% of the population of Minnesota living in urban areas, 30% of the population living in the more conservative, homogeneous areas of the state. There were many voters that, though they were sympathetic to the largest protest movement in history spawned by the death of George Floyd while in Minneapolis Police Department custody, were concerned about the violence and the looting that they saw in Minneapolis. And Trump's law and order message resonated with many of the voters that we spoke to when we went into rural Minnesota. One thing is certain, expect Minnesotans to be extremely engaged when it comes to voting. In the last election, more than 74% of eligible voters turned out to vote. It was the highest in the country.
Well, as we've been hearing, it's now become pretty clear that the races that will decide this election are the last remaining Midwestern states. Let's hear now from John Hendren, who's following them from Chicago.
Once again, it seems to come down to those blue wall states. Those are the states that Barack Obama won in, from Pennsylvania to Minnesota. In between are the key states of Wisconsin and Michigan. all of those states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, were Democratic states that went for Donald Trump in 2016. They put him over the top. Michigan was won by just 10,000 votes. And the votes that are left to be counted are the votes in the early voting that happened before the election. The Democrats believe that those heavily tilt toward Joe Biden and that will help put them over the top in the end. And in Wisconsin, it's the urban votes that haven't yet been counted. The biggest city, Milwaukee, also Kenosha, the city of Kenosha, has yet to be counted, while the county around it has been counted. And then there are the suburban and swing areas like Door County, which tends to vote for the eventual winner. Those votes have yet to be counted, and those are states that until Donald Trump was elected had not voted for a Republican for president since the 1980s. So it could be days before we hear what happens in Michigan. In Wisconsin, there is a law that says the poll workers have to stay there and count every vote until all the ballots are counted. And the folks there have told us that they expect to have an answer early Wednesday, that is 5, 6, 7 in the morning. That could be 11 Greenwich Mean Time or slightly later than that. So we're still waiting on those votes, but in the end, it comes down to the blue wall that decided it for Obama, decided it for Trump, and will decide likely this election as well.
Well, let's turn our attention to foreign policy now and the turbulent relationship between Donald Trump and North Korea's leader. It's ranged from insults and threats in 2017 to the then historic meeting in 2018. As Rob McBride reports from South Korea's capital of Seoul, negotiations stalled after Trump rejected Kim's demand for relief from U.S. sanctions.
It looked at one point as though the historic summit diplomacy of US President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un of North Korea would lead to a major breakthrough. But as negotiations stalled, it's become obvious North Korea's strategy now is wait and see.
North Korea has been already on the waiting mode when it comes to dealing with the United States. Because there's no hope for the Trump administration to make any important changes prior to the presidential election on November the 3rd.
Most analysts believe North Korea would prefer a Trump victory. They see his impulsiveness, such as when he unilaterally cancelled joint military exercises with South Korea.
But we'll be saving a tremendous amount of money. Plus, I think it's very provocative.
As their best chance of getting relief from sanctions.
If Trump re-elected, maybe it's good for Kim Jong-un because they still love each other. They're still showing up their good personal relation.
In contrast, a presidential victory for Joe Biden would likely be a return to the more traditional policy of strategic patience, of sanctions pressure and international isolation. Biden has described Kim as a tyrant and a thug. North Korea, in turn, called Biden a rabid dog. Significantly, Kim has called for a ruling party Congress for January 2021 to announce a new 5-year plan for the crippled economy, when he is also likely to map out the future U.S. strategy based on the election outcome. Kim will also be mindful of his changing relations with his neighbors, namely South Korea, China and Russia, with whom he's also held multiple summits in the past few years. He and his regime no longer look as threatening and reclusive as they once did. That more statesman-like stature was evident at the recent military parade in Pyongyang, which also featured new missiles presumably capable of reaching the United States. Kim knows that if he returns to testing those weapons in defiance of a new U.S. administration, he risks becoming an international pariah once more. Rob McBride, Al Jazeera, Seoul.
Well, Chinese leaders are watching the U.S. election closely after relations deteriorated to their lowest point in decades. Under President Trump, there have been divisions over trade and technology that have escalated rapidly. Katrina Yu has more now from Beijing.
A concert honoring the people of Wuhan and those who lost their lives during the coronavirus pandemic. Entitled Dedicated to 2020 and performed during the Beijing Music Festival, those behind the piece hope it will inspire a sense of unity.
It's a collective piece that provoke
the true human emotion that we need compassion and love. And that's the solution, more than anything else. You know, the togetherness.
But since the coronavirus outbreak began, the world's two largest powers, the US and China, have never seemed more far apart.
This was China's fault.
The Trump administration has leveled almost weekly attacks at Beijing over its role in the pandemic and other issues.
It's been unrelenting pressure on Beijing, whether it's Taiwan, Tibet, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, the South China Seas, casting all sorts of aspersions and doubts about China's technology, separating the economies. This has come at great cost.
China's leaders are watching the US election closely. Many believe a new US president will provide an opportunity to reset relations. Business leaders are hoping for a Biden presidency and a reversal of tariff hikes imposed during a 3-year trade war between the two countries. But analysts say the overall relationship will remain strained regardless of who wins.
If Biden wins the presidency, it definitely not mean that China's international environment is getting better. It's definitely not getting better. People say Biden is more cooperative. He is less interested in the trade war related stuff, but he's very much interested in getting alliance against China.
Both Trump and Biden have attacked Beijing for alleged human rights abuses in Xinjiang, Tibet and Hong Kong, encouraging other Western democracies to do the same. Many in China believe Washington is intent on containing their country and unfairly targeting Chinese companies, students and journalists. It's led to a wave of anti-US sentiment here and an increased sense of nationalism. President Xi Jinping rarely comments on the US, but has called on Chinese people to focus on rebuilding the domestic economy and becoming less reliant on foreign technology. While the election of a new president in the White House may signal a return to a more conventional style of diplomacy, many here believe the age of friendly relations between the US and China will remain a thing of the past. Katrina Yu, Al Jazeera, Beijing.
Let's speak now to Steve Okun from Singapore. He's a senior advisor of McClarty Associates, formerly a deputy general counsel in the US Department of Transportation under President Clinton. Welcome to the program, sir. So as the Chinese leadership follows these electoral events in the United States, we have to remember that China, as we've just been hearing, has been dealing with a president that says China has been ripping off the US. How much would they not want Donald Trump to win this election?
Well, the trajectory of the relationship is going to be the same either way. It is going to be the same under Donald Trump or under Joe Biden. I think what Joe Biden is going to be more effective at doing, because Donald Trump hasn't been able to do it yet, is to address the core concerns the United States has with China on their unfair trade practices, such as with regards to cyber theft, with regards to not protecting intellectual property rights, with having a state-dominated economy that is closing off to foreign businesses. So in some ways, you might think that it's better for China to have Donald Trump for the long term, because you're going to have the tension with either one, and Donald Trump isn't going to be as effective in addressing those tensions.
Right. So to what degree would they be able to reset a relationship should Joe Biden win?
Well, again, you would think what would happen is that Joe Biden would be a better negotiator in two regards. One, that he would not be worried about the purchase of agriculture goods to address the core dynamic that has to change in China, which is its unfair trade practices. So you would have a different type of negotiation. You wouldn't be trading off purchases to lower a trade deficit to address structural problems that really need to get addressed. The second thing that a Biden administration would do would be to try to find ways to cooperate with China on the existential issues for our planet, predominantly climate change, but also how to prevent future pandemics. So you might see continued confrontation, but at the same time, you'd see more cooperation potentially. And in the long run, that should be better for everybody.
Yeah, a lot of issues at stake, aren't there? Not least North Korea, as we were hearing a little bit earlier. What about that, and what difference would there be in approach to that with Joe Biden?
Well, I mean, you've seen no progress with regards to North Korea. If anything, it's gone backwards because North Korea, by all accounts, has increased its nuclear capabilities. It potentially has a larger ICBM now. You don't have international negotiations going with the Chinese and the Russians as you need if you're really going to address the North Korea problem. So I think you would have the continued use of sanctions, but you would also have hopefully some multilateral framework working with North Korea, and you wouldn't be canceling, you wouldn't be canceling exercises between the U.S. and South Korea, which are very much needed, to get nothing in return for that. So I think there'd be a much more effective approach towards North Korea. Now, it's been a problem, as we know, for decades, but I think you could have a more effective approach than we've seen the past few years.
Steve Okun, appreciate that. Thanks a lot. Steve Okun speaking to us from Singapore. Throughout his presidency, Donald Trump has consistently singled out the European Union as a threat to US interests. And while his stance on the continent has pleased its supporters, it's angered many EU leaders. Nadine Barber has more on why the US election matters more than ever for Europe.
Who's your biggest competitor, your biggest foe globally right now?
Well, I think we have a lot of foes. I think the European Union is a foe, what they do to us in trade.
The relationship between the US and Europe has never been straightforward, but for decades they've seen each other as allies. Under Donald Trump's presidency, there's been a big shift in both language and policy. On trade, threats have turned into action. US tariffs on almost $8 billion worth of EU goods have already started to hit. They were imposed over Europe's subsidies to aircraft manufacturer Airbus. In a parallel dispute involving American aid for US firm Boeing, the EU won the right to hit back with tariffs on imports from the States. Brussels is expected to hold fire until after the US election. While an actual trade deal between the economic giants seems a distant prospect, a win for Joe Biden might make things easier.
I do think that the tone of the talks is going to change. I mean, I don't need to elaborate on why it is extremely difficult, not to say impossible, to have any dealings with the White House under Trump. But I think if there's somebody reasonable, then we may still have different interests or different viewpoints, but we will negotiate, we will discuss like, civilized grown-ups and friends.
A series of political disputes has also heightened transatlantic tensions. A recurring theme for President Trump has been NATO and the idea that the US effectively subsidizes European members of the defense alliance.
So Germany's delinquent. They've been delinquent for years, and they owe NATO billions of dollars, and they have to pay it.
And when Trump announced he was quitting a Cold War-era nuclear arms treaty, French President Emmanuel Macron called for a true European army, saying the EU needed to, quote, protect itself from China, Russia, and even the United States. One senior official in the Obama administration believes continuing this war of words could cause real damage.
It's a deep concern here to not be able to credibly rely upon Europe and go to Europe on a consistent basis and deal with issues that affect us. And the key one in recent years on terrorism and the flow of terrorists in and out of Syria and the Islamic State, that required collective action to defeat the Islamic State network.
Among EU citizens, the US's image is at an all-time low. Part of the reason is Donald Trump's response to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. While major changes in areas like trade and defence could be a long way off, whoever's in the White House come January is likely to face calls to work more closely with Europe on combating the coronavirus. Nadine Barber, Al Jazeera.
Whoever wins the White House will have a major impact on Iran. There could either be 4 more years of Trump's maximum pressure campaign, or under Biden, the possible return to the 2015 nuclear deal. Dolce Jabari has more from Tehran.
November 2016. Iranians woke up to the news of a new president-elect in Washington, not paying much attention to how he could change their lives. As soon as the U.S. president took office, his first order of business was the Muslim ban, which meant no more visas for Iranians. 6 months earlier, it was a much different story, as Iran signed a major nuclear agreement with the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council: China, France, Russia, the US, and the United Kingdom, plus Germany. Iran's relationship with Western powers, including the US, had never been better. There was hope that the nuclear deal would allow Iran to rejoin the world economy. Then, in May of 2018, Donald Trump announced the United States was leaving the nuclear agreement because, in his words, it's not a good deal at all for Americans. The Iranian leadership quickly condemned the withdrawal and urged the remaining signatories to abide by their commitments to the deal. And in November 2 years ago, the United States imposed the most stringent sanctions on Iran. No one was allowed to buy Iranian oil except 8 countries which were heavily reliant on it, including Iraq. More sanctions followed in what the United States called its maximum pressure campaign in an attempt to bring Iran back to the negotiating table for a new nuclear deal, which would include the Iranian ballistic missile program. But the commander-in-chief, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, said that the time for negotiating was over.
The reason why I say we will not negotiate with the U.S. is that it is pointless. Of course, they will benefit from negotiations. They say that we should forsake our defense capabilities and our regional and national power. Well, this is not possible. An honorable person who is interested in preserving the country's interests will not give in to these demands. This is the reason why I am against negotiating with the U.S.
As tensions reached an all-time high, on January the 3rd, President Trump ordered a drone strike which killed Major General Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad. Iranian leaders all vowed revenge and described the killing of the top military commander as an act of war. Iran's Revolutionary Guard launched over a dozen missiles at a U.S. base in Iraq, but no American personnel were killed in the attack. As the U.S. elections approached, Iranian state TV broadcast the presidential debates. Though officially, Iran's position is one of ambivalence towards whomever occupies the White House next.
I think if Donald Trump is reelected, we are pretty much going to have the same as what we had in the past 4 years. And that is going to be a lot of hostility and contention between the two countries, and perhaps even a military confrontation. If Joe Biden wins the election, I think the situation is going to be more complicated, more unpredictable, in the sense that there is the potential of reaching a deal between the two countries.
For ordinary Iranians, it is the economy and the value of the rial that matters most, which is at an all-time low, while inflation is at an all-time high. All byproducts of what the government calls economic terrorism. This is the former U.S. Embassy in Tehran, and it's been 41 years since students stormed these walls and took 52 U.S. diplomats and citizens hostage for 444 days. They were demanding that the U.S. government return the Shah of Iran, who was there receiving cancer treatment. Now, it's been over 4 decades, and those feelings of hostilities and lack of trust are still visible on these walls, as these new murals show just how little has changed between Iran and the United States since the revolution of 1979. Dorsa Jabari, Al Jazeera, Tehran.
Yes, much rests on this election. Let's go back to Kamal Santamaria for the latest on where we stand with the numbers. Kamal?
Well, as of 09:30 GMT, that is 4:30 a.m. in Washington on November the 4th, this is the state of the race. Joe Biden at 238, Donald Trump at 231. It is very tight. And even though Joe Biden is clearly in the ascendancy, there are still paths for both men to win this election. We just don't know when. The reason? Well, we've still got 5 states that are too close to call. Starting up in what we've known as the Blue Belt, Pennsylvania, with its 20 electoral college votes, important for either candidate if they want to win the White House. Also, Michigan, up in that same part of the country. Well, that's North Carolina, actually, with its 15 electoral college votes in the South, and Donald Trump doing not so bad there. Let's see where else. Michigan, we'll take you back to. Let's have a look. Oh, this is slowing down as much as I am. Right, Wisconsin with its 10 electoral college votes. Again, back up in that blue belt, or what was the blue belt, now more like a yellow belt. North Carolina, we talked about already, and there it is again with its 15 electoral college votes. Georgia as well, not far from there, somewhere the Democrats did target, but it's looking probably a little more red than anything else. And finally, Nevada, still too close to call, but this would be one which would quite likely go to Joe Biden in the end. So just a reminder of the state of the roast, as we call it. This is how it looks. 238 to 213, a close election, maybe closer than any of us ever thought.
Kamal, thank you very much. Thank you. Well, as we have been discussing, these elections are happening during a global health crisis on a scale we haven't seen in 100 years. The US has recorded more coronavirus infections and deaths than anywhere else, and the economic impact is just staggering. The response of the rival candidates and their plans to deal with the pandemic have been starkly different. Take a look at this.
The virus. They're working hard. Looks like by April, you know, in theory, when it gets a little warmer, it miraculously goes away. I hope that's true.
Trump thought that his upbeat tweets could somehow stop the coronavirus. Well, I have news for Donald Trump. Like the rest of us, this virus is not impressed by his tweets.
I think wearing a face mask as I greet presidents, prime ministers, dictators, kings, queens, I don't know, somehow I don't see it for myself.
Wearing a mask is not a political statement. It's a scientific recommendation. Social distancing isn't a political statement. It's a scientific recommendation.
I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number on the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that.
I trust vaccines. I trust scientists, but I don't trust Donald Trump. And at this moment, the American people can't either.
I'm immune. I could come down and start kissing everybody. I'll kiss every guy, man and woman.
Anyone who's responsible for that many deaths should not remain as President of the United States of America.
We're going to move away from the US election briefly now and some other news. And Ethiopia has begun military operations in the north of the country amid an escalation in tensions there. Local government in the Tigray region has been accused of attacking federal troops. The local authorities have dismissed that, accusing the Prime Minister of plotting conflict. A 6-month state of emergency has been declared by the federal government. Well, the feud between the federal government in Addis Ababa and Tigray's regional leaders escalated 2 months ago when they went ahead with regional elections for the Tigray parliament. And that's despite the federal government postponing all voting because of the coronavirus pandemic. The government declared the election was void, but the regional governing body, the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, they've accused the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed of halting the polls to stay in power. Until recently, the TPLF, which is a coalition of ethnically based parties, has dominated Ethiopian politics. But that changed 2 years ago when Ahmed came to power. And the coalition has since merged into the Prime Minister's party, but the TPLF itself has refused to join. So that's a backdrop to it all. Let's speak to Malcolm Webb, who's with us from Nairobi in neighbouring Kenya. And Malcolm, why is all this escalating right now?
Well, following those regional elections that you just mentioned that took place in August, the central federal government refused to recognise the result of them. The Tigrayan regional government had already refuted the legitimacy of President Abiy Ahmed. So we had two authorities refusing to recognise each other. The central federal government then cut off funding to the Tigrayan regional government. And in following that, it's also important to understand there's a significant part of Ethiopia's military which is stationed in the Tigray region, called the Northern Command. And now the general who was in charge of it resigned. President Abiy Ahmed sent another general to replace the resigning general, but he was blocked by forces loyal to the Tigrayan regional government. And the Tigrayan regional government now says that the Northern Command has defected to its side, although we haven't yet had a response from the central government, and we don't know how much of that Northern Command is under Tigrayan control.
So what could happen next, Malcolm?
Well, we've got a significant part of the military that seems to be under that Tigrayan control. It's worth also bearing in mind the history here. The reason that large part of the military is in Tigray is because of decades of conflict with neighbouring Eritrea. First an independence war, then a border war, but that was finally resolved 2 years ago following President Abiy Ahmed coming to power, and that's He was resolving that conflict with neighbouring Eritrea. He was credited with, and that's the key reason why he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. But now with these escalating tensions between the central federal government and Tigray, there's also a threat of tensions between Eritrea and Tigray as well. That could add a further complicating dimension to this conflict. And this is all happening at the same time as a number of brewing conflicts and growing tensions between Ethiopia's central government and other regions in Ethiopia, where ethnically aligned regional parties and powers are growing, having increasingly growing dissatisfaction with the central government. Just a few days ago, in the Oromia region to the south, rights groups reported that more than 50 civilians were killed there by an armed group.
Malcolm, thanks very much. Malcolm Webb reporting there from Nairobi. Aid agencies say it could take months to restore power to some areas of the Philippines after Typhoon Goni destroyed houses and triggered floods across the country. At least 20 people have been killed in the world's strongest storm this year. Now another one is on the way. Jamila Alandogan reports from Albay, which is one of the hardest hit regions.
Typhoon Goni hit the province of Albay for only a few hours. But the devastation it left behind is beyond comprehension. This is the coastal community of Tiwi. It was once a busy fishing village of more than 1,000 families. This is all what's left of it now. More than 90% of the homes here have been destroyed. It took Nercy and Romeo Benedicto 15 years to build their home. The only reminder of it now is this. Nercy says the water was up to their necks and they had to wade through rough waves to climb onto a wall with their children.
I was so afraid for my children. Perhaps someone out there may care to help us. We are in need of food and blankets. We will be grateful for whatever we receive.
My 6-year-old grandson said, "Papa, please, I am cold and afraid. Please, let's leave this place now." He was clearly scared.
Everywhere you turn, there is destruction. Images that give a glimpse of the harrowing experience that people here went through. Even for a region often battered by natural disasters, the devastation here is clearly unprecedented. This is a community deeply traumatized by Typhoon Goni, and people here tell us they are desperate. Now they are hungry and homeless. Typhoon Goni was the most powerful storm to hit this year. It made landfall in the Bicol region early on Sunday morning, leaving a trail of destruction. More than 1 million people may need help. Maxine Cal is preparing dinner. This pot of soup will have to feed 3 families tonight. Tomorrow's meal, she says, may not come at all. Survivors salvage whatever they can during the day. And at night, they huddle to sleep on the same ground where their homes once stood, keeping their children close. They say they were poor, but they always had what they needed. But Typhoon Goni has taken everything away. Jamela Alindogan, Al Jazeera, Tiwi Albay, in the southern Luzon region of the Philippines.
Hurricane Eta has weakened to a tropical storm after making landfall in Nicaragua as a Category 4 hurricane. At least 2 people have died in landslides caused by the heavy rain. It's a slow-moving storm and it's caused devastation to some of the poorest communities, and it's left tens of thousands of people without power. Let's hear now from Manuel Rapello.
Authorities in Nicaragua are scrambling to evacuate thousands of people caught in the path of Hurricane Eta. With winds of 240 kilometers per hour, the powerful Category 4 hurricane hammered the Nicaraguan coast for hours as it slowly inched toward landfall.
We are taking our things out, looking for a safer place to take shelter because of fear. To protect ourselves above all, we're looking for a safer place to weather the hurricane.
The National Hurricane Center has called Eta an extremely dangerous storm. In the community of Bilwi in northeast Nicaragua, many families were moved to higher ground over concerns of potentially life-threatening storm surge and deadly winds.
We had to come to this place because we're not safe in our houses, because we live near the beach, so we had to come here to take refuge, the whole family.
Ada is the 12th hurricane of the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season. It's also the most powerful storm to hit this region in years. Environmental experts say there's a direct link between climate change and the intensity of hurricanes, making it increasingly difficult for people to prepare effectively for stronger storms.
We cannot prepare. We have some very good people working in disaster management in the international community and in the government, but the resources are very limited, as you know, and preparing for the variations of climate change, which are coming very quickly and changing very quickly, adapting to these new storm dynamics is almost impossible.
Though Ada will weaken quickly as it tracks inland, the slow-moving storm is expected to dump heavy rains over Nicaragua and Honduras for several more days, raising the potential for deadly floods and mudslides across a wide portion of Central America. Manuel Rapalo, Al Jazeera.
All right, before I sign off, just want to recap on our top story. In the U.S. presidential elections, voting has closed. All eyes are on the vote count in a handful of swing states. The electoral map is looking like this. Joe Biden has 238 electoral votes so far. His most significant win yet is Arizona, a longtime Republican stronghold that Donald Trump carried in 2016. The president's tally is 213, and he's managed to retain Texas, Florida, Ohio, and Iowa, all of which were considered swing states. The magic number for victory is 270 electoral votes. It's evenly balanced.
With Jenna Sago, it's bespoke. She does exquisite pieces, very glamorous.
It's part of our culture to look our very, very best for a special occasion. And for that, people will spend money. Everything you see on the catwalk, they do it here. If there is going to be longevity, the young have to come in and turn things around.
My Nigeria on Al Jazeera.
Examining the impact of today's headlines.
We escape from our countries to be safe, but we don't feel safe here.
Setting the agenda for tomorrow's discussions.
My black body, my whole essence, my whole being has been weaponized.
International filmmakers and world-class journalists.
Tell us how and why the textile and fashion industries are major water polluters.
Bring programs to inform and inspire you. On Al Jazeera. It's a centuries-old battle, and the baton is being passed to a new generation. Witness follows a young Native American as he takes the struggle into 21st century America.
Everybody's going to know about what we did here, the sacrifices that we made. This is going to be something that's going to be remembered long time to come.
On a Knife Edge, on Al Jazeera.
Do you feel validated in some way? Is it a type of performative activism? Let's go back to specifically you calling Donald Trump a white supremacist.
The lights are on, and there's nowhere to hide.
Join me, Rochelle Carey, as I put the upfront questions to my special guests and challenge them to some straight-talking political debate.
Upfront returns on Al Jazeera.
We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
Donald Trump attempts to claim victory in the U.S. presidential election with results still not announced in several key battleground states. Well, his rival, Joe Biden, has managed to flip the state of Arizona in his favor and is currently ahead with 238 electoral votes against Trump's 230. Hello there, I'm Nastasia Tay, and this is the News Hour live from our headquarters here in Doha, coming up in the next 60 minutes. With the tallying of votes still ongoing, Trump threatens to go to the Supreme Court to try to stop the counting. Biden has threatened counter-legal action. And with both candidates aged over 70, we take a look at how their running mates are now more important than ever. Well, the race to the White House has become incredibly tight. Hours after the polls closed, no candidate has secured enough electoral college votes to win. But that hasn't stopped both candidates being confident of victory, despite millions of votes still uncounted. Donald Trump has threatened to go to the Supreme Court, something that Biden's team have said they are ready to challenge. The total vote count could take days. Well, we have a team of reporters for you on the ground this hour. Rob Reynolds is monitoring developments from Los Angeles. Mike Hanna is in Biden's home state, Delaware. And our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett, is in Washington, D.C. But first, Rosalind Jordan takes a look at just how these last few hours have unfolded.
Shortly after 2 a.m. on Wednesday, President Donald Trump told his supporters and the nation that Democrats were trying to steal his Election Day victory. And Trump said he was suing to hold on to the Oval Office.
So we'll be going to the U.S. Supreme Court. We want all voting to stop.
But with the vote count still unfinished in at least 10 states, Trump's claim of victory was dubious. Earlier in the night, Trump's Democratic rival Joe Biden urged his supporters to, as he put it, keep the faith.
I'm here to tell you tonight, we believe we're on track to win this election. We knew because of the unprecedented early vote and the mail-in vote that it's going to take a while. We're going to have to be patient until the hard work of tallying the votes is finished.
It's long been standard practice in U.S. elections to count all the ballots, no matter how many days it takes. This year, the delay is considerable, given the more than 100 million ballots being cast weeks ahead of time, as well as the millions of votes cast on Election Day. Swing states, such as Michigan and Georgia, announced late on Tuesday that they would resume counting on Wednesday morning. And at least one swing state, Pennsylvania, said it might not be done until Friday. That state's governor pushed back against President Donald Trump's accusations that counting ballots after Election Day is illegal.
We may not know the results today as a result, but I encourage all of us to take a deep breath and, as I've been saying, just be patient. What's most important is that we have accurate results and that every vote is counted, even if that takes a little longer.
News organizations had Biden ahead with more than 200 electoral college votes. But the winning candidate needs 270 to be declared the winner. That likely won't happen before Wednesday at the earliest. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera.
Well, let's get a reminder of the numbers for you here. Kamal has been up all night for us. Kamal will give us a roundup.
Well, as of 1000 hours GMT, which is 5 a.m. in Washington, D.C., this is the state of the race. 238 to Joe Biden, 213 to Donald Trump. It's very tight, it's very close, and even though clearly Joe Biden has a lead and is closer to 270 than his rival, there are paths for both candidates at this point because there are 5 states left. And we're going to run you through them, all too close to call at this stage. 10 electoral college votes in Wisconsin, part of the so-called Blue Belt, of course, which Donald Trump picked up 4 years ago. That includes Pennsylvania, 20 electoral college votes, which will be vital for either candidate to pick up the presidency at the end of, well, whichever day it ends up being. We're also looking at Michigan in that part of the country with its 16 electoral college votes, completing the Blue Belt there. Important, probably more for Joe Biden at this stage than it is for Donald Trump. There are 2 other states to think about, and that is North Carolina with 15 electoral college votes, and also the state of Georgia with its 16. Both southern states, Donald Trump would be eyeing those ones up to try to get him over the line with some extra pickups along the way. That might include Nevada, with 6 electoral college votes, which we would expect to go blue, but then you can always expect the unexpected, can't you? So, a final look at the state of the race 238 to 213, those states in yellow, the ones that are left. The swing states, the battleground states, the states which will ultimately decide this 2020 election.
Thanks so much, Kamal. Well, let's now go to Washington, D.C. and our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett. Kimberly, a much tighter race than the Democrats wanted or hoped for, especially looking at these latest Wisconsin numbers now.
Yeah, I'll get to those Wisconsin numbers in a moment. What we are really focusing on is the fact that we don't have a winner yet. And as Kamal has highlighted, there are a number of states that are still in play. There's going to be a lot of soul searching for Democrats with regard to that, why this is happening. But there's no question that the U.S. president is already mapping out his strategies. He spoke to his supporters in the East Room of the White House, essentially saying that he believes he's won, that he has claimed victory. Now, what's astonishing about this is that the U.S. president, even before all the ballots have been counted, is saying that this is an attempt by his opponent to try and steal the election. The U.S. president believing that he is in the lead in battleground states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, and also Wisconsin, as you mentioned. And in fact, that was true. Donald Trump was ahead in Wisconsin, but all of that started to change as of about 30 minutes ago, maybe a little bit more. What we saw is one heavily Democratic district within that state putting its results forward. And what it has shown now is that by about 9,000 votes, now Joe Biden is in the lead in Wisconsin. This is significant. This is encouraging for Democrats. They are feeling very positive about it. Now, we should point out that there's still vote counting that is being done. But at the same time, this is one of those key battleground states that we're going to have to watch. But again, the U.S. president already claiming victory, saying he feels confident about some of these other battleground states, including Michigan and Pennsylvania, where we know that the counting will continue potentially for days.
Indeed, it can. Kimberly Halkett there, our White House correspondent in Washington, D.C., with all the latest. Thanks, Kimberly. Well, let's now get the view from the Biden camp with Mike Hanna. He's in Wilmington, Delaware, Joe Biden's home state. Mike, Biden tonight really calling for patience when he came out earlier, despite sounding fairly confident. He must be very happy about these Wisconsin numbers.
Well, that's very important indeed. Philip, to the Democrats, to the Biden campaign in the early hours of the morning. Wisconsin, one of those blue wall states, along with Pennsylvania and Michigan, absolutely critical for Joe Biden to win, given the results that we've seen in the course of the count. But that, along with Arizona, certainly a big blow for the Democrats, a major fillip for them. And that is something that Joe Biden, when he spoke to his supporters here at the convention center just after midnight, he was already saying then he felt good, that he was optimistic, particularly about those states. Now, these states are interesting because why we have not got the result yet is because of the massive amount of mail-in votes and absentee voter forms that were being counted in terms of the law of each of those states only after the polls had closed. In other states like Florida, for example, the mail-in votes were counted from when they were received. But in these three states, the counting started when the polls closed. Now, why this is significant is that the trend that has been apparent in this election, as well as in previous ones, is that mail-in votes tend to heavily favor Democrats. Just as in this election and in past ones, the on-the-day vote has favored Republicans. We've seen that throughout this train of results that we've been hearing throughout the night and into the early morning. So the fact that what is being counted now are largely mail-in votes, very, very significant for the Biden campaign, knowing that they need to win the Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania to have their way clear to securing the White House. But this may take time. Pennsylvania is probably going to be counting votes over the next 24, 48 hours. They have, according to the Supreme Court ruling a week ago, up until 5 p.m. on Friday to count all of these votes as long as they were postmarked no later than November the 3rd. A very, very tense race. And now the legal aspect of it beginning to take shape. The Biden campaign responding furiously to President Trump's demand that the counting now stop, insisting that he's going to go to the Supreme Court to ensure that it will do so. The campaign releasing a statement saying this was unprecedented because never before in our history has a president of the United States sought to strip Americans of their voice in a national election. The statement continues that Donald Trump doesn't decide elections, neither does Joe Biden decide elections. It's voters who decide elections, and it's important for every vote to be counted.
Now, Mike, despite the confidence that we are hearing from the Biden camp, there hasn't been that blue wave that they were really hoping for. Is there a sense of disappointment there tonight at all?
Well, certainly it's not what the Democrats had hoped for. They had hoped to see basically a virtual landslide, that the result would have become apparent with the first mass of results coming in that would have pushed away any thought of legal action, of Donald Trump contesting the result. But that simply did not happen. Florida in particular, a major disappointment for Democrats. They really thought that they had a very big chance in that massive state in terms of electoral votes. They failed there, and not narrowly in the end either. Texas, another state that the Democrats had been eyeing. Now, another state where we're still awaiting results, Georgia. Trump was showing a substantial lead there, but still the Democrats have a sniff. They had been really looking towards Georgia. Now, these disappointments offset by that win in Arizona, a major win for the Democrats, the first one in decades for a Democratic candidate. But still, Democrats not performing as they would have liked, both in the presidential race, and still no sign that they are going to flip the Senate, which they'd been hoping to do. The other only bright point is that it is clear that they will retain control of the House.
Mike Hanna, they're on the ground for us in Delaware. Thanks so much, Mike. Well, let's now speak to Rob Reynolds. He is in Los Angeles, California. That's the state with the biggest number of electoral votes. He's also outside the Staples Center, a stadium that was turned into a voting center. Rob, I want to start with that latest big call for Biden, Arizona. It really changes the state of the race very substantially.
Yes, it does, Nastasia. It's a major pickup for the Democrats, and it gives Joe Biden more paths to victory, depending on how things shake out in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, perhaps Georgia, and how those ongoing vote tallies measure up. The Democrats also picked up a Senate seat in Arizona with Mark Kelly, the former astronaut and husband of Gabby Giffords, a U.S. congressperson who was almost fatally shot in an incident several years ago in 2012, beating the Republican incumbent Martha McSally. That probably will not affect the overall Republican control of the Senate. But the Biden camp worked really hard in Arizona. They tried extremely hard to organize the Latino population, the large Native American population in the state, and in the suburban areas of Maricopa County around Phoenix to work on getting the voters there to who had perhaps been solidly Republican before to switch sides. And it may be that the traditional Barry Goldwater style, John McCain style Republicans of Arizona in those suburban areas around Phoenix decided that President Trump was not a fit standard bearer for their type of republicanism.
Rob, I do want to ask you, because we are waiting for results still, and I imagine people around the country are running out of nails to bite. Many have gone to bed. We are still waiting for some of those key blue wall states, and we could potentially be waiting for quite a while.
You know, Nastasia, it's not even a matter of tension or election fatigue. It's also a lot of bitterness and rancor in the country that this election and campaign have boiled up to the surface You've seen a lot of very bitter contests, a lot of bitterness being directed from one side to the other. Armed supporters of President Trump going to polling places and things like that. Now, having said all that, there was no notable disturbances or unrest at polling places throughout the country on Election Day. But wait till tomorrow. Will the people who most fervently support President Trump, many of whom are armed, will they see his comments about the alleged stealing of the election, for which there's no basis, by the president as some sort of signal? Will there be any kind of unrest? We don't know. We certainly hope not. But again, there's been so much bitterness stirred up by this election that it's really changed the country in ways that we'll probably not fully appreciate for years, long after all of these votes of 2020 are counted.
Indeed, unprecedented polarization in the U.S. Rob Reynolds there for us in Los Angeles, California. Thanks so much, Rob. Well, Donald Trump and Joe Biden are the two oldest presidential nominees in American history, and that means their running mates have become more important than ever. Mike Pence and Kamala Harris couldn't be more different, from their politics to their personalities. Mohammed Jamjoom has more.
Senator Harris and Vice President Pence, thank you for being here.
When Vice President Mike Pence and Senator Kamala Harris took to the debate stage in October, viewers around the world witnessed a study in contrasts.
But when you say what the American people have done over these last 8 months hasn't worked, that's a great disservice to the sacrifices the American people have made.
So let's talk about caring about the American people. The American people have had to sacrifice far too much because of the incompetence of this administration.
On the Republican side, 61-year-old Vice President Mike Pence, who over the past 4 years has proven himself President Donald Trump's most loyal ally. Known for his opposition to abortion, the former governor of Indiana is an evangelical Christian and champion of the religious right. Critics say Pence has been a driving force in the Trump administration's efforts to roll back protections for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. Before being chosen as Trump's running mate in 2016, Pence had openly questioned some of Trump's policies. After joining the ticket, though, Pence transformed into an adept second-in-command who always deferred to his boss.
Because thanks to your leadership from early on, not only are we bringing a whole-of-government approach to confronting the coronavirus, we're bringing an all-of-America approach.
Even as head of the White House coronavirus task force, Pence wouldn't let the news that members of his team had tested positive for COVID-19 keep him off the campaign trail. Continuing to campaign for Trump, even as public health officials criticized the decision.
Greetings, America.
On the Democratic side, 56-year-old Senator Kamala Harris. The daughter of immigrants from Jamaica and India, Harris, in 2016, became the first South Asian American and second African American woman elected to the U.S. Senate, where she represents the state of California. In 2020, as the Democratic vice presidential nominee, she became the first woman of color to be included on a major party's presidential ticket.
That I am here tonight is a testament to the dedication of generations before me. Women and men who believed so fiercely in the promise of equality, liberty, and justice for all.
Known as one of the toughest interrogators in Congress, Harris has repeatedly used skills honed during her tenure as a prosecutor and a former Attorney General of California while questioning Trump administration officials. During Harris's short-lived presidential campaign, critics questioned her shifting positions on policy issues and her record as prosecutor. But as a barrier-breaking running mate to Joe Biden, Harris, an advocate for racial and social justice, has proven popular. With supporters applauding Harris's pledge to offer a path to citizenship to millions of undocumented immigrants living in the U.S. In the final weeks of the campaign, members of Harris's team also tested positive for COVID-19. After learning the news, Harris temporarily stopped traveling. A bracing reminder that, for America's 2020 vice presidential candidates, differences in politics, policy, and personality could not be more stark. Mohammed Jamjoom, Al Jazeera.
Well, joining us now from Singapore is Steve Oken. He's a senior advisor at McClatchy Associates and was also Deputy General Counsel in the U.S. Department of Transportation under President Clinton. Steve, obviously, I know we're still waiting on some really critical results, but I do want to start with the rhetoric that we're already hearing from the White House. I suppose, given what the president was saying in the lead up to this vote, there really wasn't much surprise there. Where do you see this going?
Well, I mean, what the president wants to do is one of two things. First, he wants to keep votes from getting counted that haven't been counted yet, because the votes that have not been counted yet tend to be mail-in votes, and those are more Democratic this time around because of the pandemic and because of the education the Democratic Party did. Then, if those votes do get counted and he loses, he will challenge those ballots on the ground of fraud, which has never been proven, but that's not going to stop him from filing lawsuits.
Well, you worked in the Clinton administration yourself. What is the conversation right now in the Biden camp likely to be like? I know it's something like just after 5 a.m. there, but I imagine no one's getting much sleep.
Okay, actually, Donald Trump has telegraphed this for a long time. He has said that people shouldn't be allowed to vote by mail. The Republicans have filed lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit in various states saying there shouldn't be vote by mail, or the vote by mail should be tougher than it is when it comes to witness signatures, and that the vote by mail shouldn't count if the postal ballot comes in after Election Day, even if it's postmarked before then. So the Democrats are well prepared for this. It's not like 2000. The lawyers are ready. The lawyers are fanning out in the states where there is likely to be a contest. It could be Wisconsin, it could be Michigan, it could be Pennsylvania, and they're going to meet them head on if they go down this route of trying to disenfranchise voters.
Just taking a step back here, Steve, can President Trump actually order a halt to vote counting? I do want to make that clear for our viewers. What kind of legal basis would he have to try to take something like that to the Supreme Court?
Well, President Trump can't halt anything as president because the elections are run by the states. And so there's literally, you kind of think of it, there's 51 different officials in charge of the 51 elections going on right now between the 50 states and Washington, D.C. Now, what President Trump can do is to take a lawsuit to say that ballots that have not yet been counted, even though they have been received or postmarked by Election Day, shouldn't be counted, and to try and get a court to halt a ballot. I don't think there's really precedent for that, but that's what he could do. So he can't order anything. He would have to go to a court and get a court to agree with him. Every court has ruled against the Republicans so far in Nevada and in Texas and in Pennsylvania and in North Carolina. So we'll see what his strategy is. The Democrat strategy right now is get every ballot counted. Let's see what happens in Michigan and Pennsylvania and Georgia and North Carolina and Wisconsin. Because if Joe Biden wins just 2 of those 5 states, he will be president.
Steve, I'm curious about how the president's comments might be going down with his own party. Could some Republicans potentially even feel like he's crossed a line here?
Well, it is possible. And there are Republicans who, if they have to run for themselves. So let's say the writing's on the wall and that Donald Trump isn't going to be there for a second term. And it may be very, very messy between now and January 20th. But then when he's no longer president, those governors, those state officials are going to have to look at their own constituents and said they did the right thing without having Donald Trump in the White House. So it is possible that Republicans throughout the various states where these contests are happening decide to let the vote get counted. And then, you let the chips fall where they may, depending on how the vote turns out.
Steve, before I let you go, I do want to also ask you a quick question about the Senate, because it really now looks like it could potentially come down to a runoff in January before we know which party could control the Senate.
Well, it actually, I think if you're leaning now, you'd say that the Republicans will probably retain control of the Senate. And then, look, this reminds me of the '96 election when the country said, we're going to give Bill Clinton a second term. But we don't want to have a unified Democratic Congress and White House. And so we're going to keep the Republicans in control of the Senate. The same thing could happen here, where the Democrats get the White House and the Republicans have the Senate. So you do have a split government. Hopefully, if that were to happen, the two sides would be able to compromise, unlike they haven't been able to do that with Donald Trump as president. But maybe with a narrower margin, without Donald Trump in the White House, we'll get some more balance. But it's very doubtful right now that the Democrats will get the White House and the Senate.
Steve Okun there speaking to us from Singapore. Great to get your insights here on Al Jazeera. Steve, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, Minnesota has been at the center of protests over racial injustice since the killing of George Floyd in police custody back in May. Natasha Ghanem is there with reaction from Minneapolis voters.
We spent part of election evening here at the George Floyd Memorial. As you can hear, there was music, some dancing, food, and Al Jazeera English projected on a screen. Many of the young voters we spoke to say they voted for Biden, but only because they no longer want President Donald Trump in office. They don't believe that Biden will do much to address concerns over police brutality and advance racial equality in this country. Minnesota has been a Democratic, reliable Democratic source of support for almost 50 years. But Trump has been hoping to grab those 10 electoral college votes. He lost the state in 2016 by less than 45,000 votes. He viewed that as a missed opportunity and campaigned aggressively in the state, wallpapered the airwaves with his advertising. The Republican Party's strategy was to minimize losses in the progressive cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis, as well as the suburbs, and to drive up voting, really trying to get out the vote in the more rural, white, conservative parts of the state. You have 70% of the population of Minnesota living in urban areas, 30% of the population living in the more conservative, homogeneous areas of the state. There were many voters that, though they were sympathetic to the largest protest movement in history spawned by the death of George Floyd while in Minneapolis Police Department custody, were concerned about the violence and the looting that they saw in Minneapolis. And Trump's law and order message resonated with many of the voters that we spoke to when we went into rural Minnesota. One thing is certain, expect Minnesotans to be extremely engaged when it comes to voting. In the last election, more than 74% of eligible voters turned out to vote. It was the highest in the country.
Well, it has now become very clear that the races that will decide this election are the last remaining Midwestern states. John Hendren is following them for us from Chicago.
Once again, it seems to come down to those blue wall states. Those are the states that Barack Obama won in, from Pennsylvania to Minnesota. In between are the key states of Wisconsin and Michigan. All of those states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, were Democratic states that went for Donald Trump in 2016. They put him over the top. Michigan was won by just 10,000 votes. And the votes that are left to be counted are the votes in the early voting that happened before the election. The Democrats believe that those heavily tilt toward Joe Biden and that will help put them over the top in the end. And in Wisconsin, it's the urban votes that haven't yet been counted. The biggest city, Milwaukee, also Kenosha, the city of Kenosha, has yet to be counted, while the county around it has been counted. And then there are the suburban and swing areas like Door County, which tends to vote for the eventual winner. Those votes have yet to be counted. And those are states that, until Donald Trump was elected, had not voted for a Republican for president since the 1980s. So it could be days before we hear what happens in Michigan. In Wisconsin, there is a law that says the poll workers have to stay there and count every vote until all the ballots are counted. And the folks there have told us that they expect to have an answer early Wednesday, that is 5, 6, 7 in the morning. That could be 11 Greenwich Mean Time or slightly later than that. So we're still waiting on those votes. But in the end, it comes down to the blue wall that decided it for Obama, decided it for Trump, and will decide likely this election as well.
Well, you heard John mention Pennsylvania there. That's one of the key battleground states which could decide this election. Here's Kamal Santamaria on why it matters.
Pennsylvania is famously Joe Biden's native state. You've probably heard him mention Scranton, Pennsylvania more than a few times. But it is important for anyone who wants to win the White House. Pennsylvania has 20 electoral college votes on offer, and the pollsters believe the Keystone State could in fact hold the key in deciding who wins this time around. A bit of history for you here. We go back to 1992, And for 6 straight presidential elections, it has backed the Democrats, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, who won twice, John Kerry and Al Gore, who didn't. But Pennsylvania still became part of the so-called Democratic blue wall. But like so many things, all of that changed in 2016. Pennsylvania flipped red, only just, when Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton by less than 1%. Now, we're going to bring up the 2016 electoral map to see who did well where. And you've got the Democrats down in the southeast. They did well there, the cities and the suburbs. The Republicans, who won in mostly rural areas, did pick up some urban centres. And then the 3 counties which we've coloured in orange, who switched from Barack Obama in 2 elections to Donald Trump in 2016. Quick look at some demographics for you, and more than 80% of Pennsylvania's voting population is white. Blue-collar voters who've long been the Democrats' base, non-college educated voters who favour Donald Trump. Also 10% of eligible voters are black, and Hispanics a little over 5%. So it'll probably come down to those urban voters in Pennsylvania and whether Biden can hold on to them and then woo some back from Donald Trump to decide who gets 20 vital electoral college votes. And that is why Pennsylvania matters.
Well, Heidi Jo Castro is in Houston, Texas, where President Donald Trump has been declared the winner.
Well, it's no surprise here that President Trump won Texas. However, his margin of victory at just 6%, as nearly all of the votes have been counted, that is a surprise because it confirms that Texas, for the first time in a long time, is a competitive state for Democrats. That margin of victory is smaller than any other Republican presidential candidate in Texas in modern history. And you can see that translated to tension on the ground here as both parties fought for every vote. Now the question is whether or not Trump's most fervent supporters, who are the ones that delivered him this Texas victory, who reside in the rural countryside of Texas, where some counties have gone for Trump in more than 90% margins of victory for the president, is how they will react to the president's latest statements from the White House in his premature declaration of victory and indicating that he would contest an election result that is not in his favor. Some of these most rural parts of Texas are home to right-wing militias, and that's had authorities in Texas cities preparing for civil unrest in the morning when voters here and Texans wake up to the news to hear their president's comments. Certainly there has already been tension on the ground in the last week of campaigning, where we saw Trump's supporters surrounding a Biden campaign bus, nearly forcing it off the road. And there have certainly been verbal altercations between supporters of Biden and Trump outside of polling locations. So it still remains to be seen exactly how Texans may react to this, to the comments of President Trump that were spoken in the middle of the night. And certainly tensions are high once they wake in the morning.
Well, another big state is Florida. And like Texas, it also voted for Donald Trump. Andy Gallagher is in Miami with more.
When you look at where I'm standing now, this is Miami-Dade County, and you look at how Biden did among the Latino vote here, and it was extremely poor when you compare it to how Hillary Clinton did with the same community back in 2016. It seems to me that the president's push to paint Joe Biden as a socialist worked. We already knew that about 1 million of the Cuban Americans that lived in a city like this in Miami would likely vote Republican, but it seems like a lot of Latino and Hispanic voters who didn't vote for Trump last time did so this time. Now, the margin by which Trump won this state was still pretty slim. In 2016, he won by about 112,000 votes. It's about 350,000 this time around. But the picture is very clear. This was a state that Trump needed to keep his hopes alive in this presidential election, to get another 4 years in the White House. 29 electoral college votes really do matter for the president.
Well, let's dig into this with Peter Matthews. He's a professor of political science at Cyprus College and also the author of Dollar Democracy. He joins us now from Los Angeles. Peter, thanks for sticking with us throughout this whole night. I am curious about these demographics that we're seeing, especially in Florida. As Andy was saying, there's huge support for Trump from Cubans and Hispanics. What's behind that?
It's primarily the Cuban Americans and the Venezuelan Hispanic Americans who came more recently as refugees from the Venezuelan situation. And they have a very hardcore anti-communist or even anti-socialist impetus. And they're putting that out there. They're using that. And Trump has been using that to spread rumors that Joe Biden is a socialist. And that kind of thing could have affected it, the vote there in Florida, especially with the Latino community, or Hispanic community, I should say, because the Puerto Rican Floridians are in the Biden campaign. So I think it's which particular Hispanic groups we're talking about. It's primarily Venezuelans and Cubans. And the usage of this anti-socialist rhetoric by the Trump campaign, very unfairly trying to characterize Joe Biden and tarnish his reputation with those voters.
Well, looking at a little bit further across the country, the election map in Arizona, which flipped, it is now not looking terribly bad for the Democrats. What drove that flip in Arizona?
There were demographic changes, and of course, many of those Latinos who live there are more progressive and more liberal, especially the younger people that voted this time around, than the Floridian Hispanics. So that's a different type of demographic of the Latino or Hispanic community in Arizona, and the numbers have surged. The numbers of Hispanics in population and voting age population has gotten much larger than back in 2018. Young people voted there a lot more as a whole. Young people as a whole of all ethnicities in Arizona surged this time. And Arizona is definitely going to go for Joe Biden. I'm pretty sure about that.
Peter, after the polling errors that we saw back in 2016, how do you think this year's polling error that we're seemingly seeing in the Southwest, how will that be regarded?
Well, a great skepticism of polling from a lot of sources, because now it's going to be 2 elections in a row. But I think what we have to do is to go to exit polling to see what happened exactly. I do think there may have been a hidden Trump vote that was not picked up by the pollsters. I think Trump's tours in the middle of COVID was very dangerous for people's health. It helped him get a lot of the voter enthusiasm among his voters, and some of their friends and relatives who did not vote last time were brought into the fold to register this time to vote for Donald Trump. So I think the exit polling will show us where the errors were by the polling, by the regular polling, that predicted a much higher turnout for Biden, but it actually didn't result. So we have to see in terms of the vote count and the exit polling, which can also be matched up with the regular polling before we can actually answer that question.
Well, Peter, it does feel like the president had a fairly good night. As we've been saying, that blue wave never quite materialized. Yet Trump is already questioning the legitimacy of this whole process. What, in your mind, is his strategic thinking here?
It's very difficult to get into President Trump's mind at times, but I think what he's trying to do is to really make it look like there's no legitimacy to a Biden victory, even if Biden ekes out a victory by winning those 3 blue wall states. And he just very well might do that. And so that way Trump can say, no, this is not really what happened. They counted votes after the election deadlines, which is a complete lie. The votes that are being counted now in those states like Pennsylvania and even Wisconsin are legitimate votes that were cast on election day before the deadline was up. They just, if they were postmarked, the courts have decided that the Pennsylvanians can count those votes as long as they were postmarked on election day, which they're doing. And Trump is trying to delegitimize the whole process by sowing confusion and trying to get his supporters to think that there's actually voters voting after the election is over, which is totally, to me, egregious, is unethical, and it's actually delegitimizing the American system of democracy. And I think this is something the president should take responsibility for. Not do it, basically.
You mentioned the system of democracy there. I want to ask you about the unprecedented levels of polarization that we seem to be seeing across the country now. You mentioned exit polls earlier as well. Has that given us any indication as to what the priorities were here? Did party Trump policy this time round?
I think it was a combination, actually, because there were some very clear differences in policy. The people who voted for the Democratic candidate wanted more government action to help save us from COVID, to be able to have this $2.5 trillion investment once again, to be repeated again. Whereas the other one said, Trump said, didn't really push that. And we need to have more investment in the economy, which I think Joe Biden was pushing. And so those voters supported that in creating more jobs with new technologies, clean energy, et cetera. Trump says he could create more jobs by just cutting taxes and deregulating the economy. So that's how a right-left continuum was able to separate the two sides, but also the racism, the xenophobism, the activity of being anti-immigrant, that kind of thing that Trump brought back once again, as he used back in 2016 to win a very bare-knuckle victory, very small victory. He won that by using and starting his campaign off with those racist tropes about immigrants and Mexican Americans and Mexican immigrants, and he's said really bad things, and he brought that back again this time around, and that's what's divided the country as well. And, when there are economic crises around, people tend to fall for this kind of demagoguery, and it's very, very dangerous and sad and wrong for democracy. So this is what's been repeated again, and we'll have to see how it ends up.
And we'll have to see how this all plays out over the coming hours, days, potentially weeks. Peter Matthews there, Professor of Political Science at Cyprus College. Thanks again for joining us here on Al Jazeera.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well, let's now turn our attention to foreign policy and the turbulent relationship between Donald Trump and North Korea's leader. It's ranged from insults and threats in 2017 to the then historic meeting in 2018. But as Ron McBride reports from South Korea's capital, Seoul, negotiations stalled after Trump rejected Kim's demand for relief from U.S. sanctions.
It looked at one point as though the historic summit diplomacy of US President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un of North Korea would lead to a major breakthrough. But as negotiations stalled, it's become obvious North Korea's strategy now is wait and see.
North Korea has been already on the waiting mode when it comes to dealing with the United States, because there's no hope for the Trump administration to make any important changes prior to the presidential election on November the 3rd.
Most analysts believe North Korea would prefer a Trump victory. They see his impulsiveness, such as when he unilaterally cancelled joint military exercises with South Korea.
But we'll be saving a tremendous amount of money. Plus, I think it's very provocative.
As their best chance of getting relief from sanctions.
If Trump re-elected, maybe it's good for Kim Jong-un because they still love each other. They're still showing up their good personal relation.
In contrast, a presidential victory for Joe Biden would likely be a return to the more traditional policy of strategic patience, of sanctions pressure and international isolation. Biden has described Kim as a tyrant and a thug. North Korea, in turn, called Biden a rabid dog. Significantly, Kim has called for a ruling party Congress for January 2021 to announce a new 5-year plan for the crippled economy, when he is also likely to map out the future U.S. strategy based on the election outcome. Kim will also be mindful of his changing relations with his neighbors, namely South Korea, China and Russia, with whom he's also held multiple summits in the past few years. He and his regime no longer look as threatening and reclusive as they once did. That more statesmanlike stature was evident at the recent military parade in Pyongyang, which also featured new missiles presumably capable of reaching the United States. Kim knows that if he returns to testing those weapons in defiance of a new U.S. administration, he risks becoming an international pariah once more. Rob McBride, Al Jazeera, Seoul.
Well, Chinese leaders are also watching the U.S. election very closely after relations deteriorated to their lowest point in decades. Under President Trump, there have been divisions over trade and technology that have escalated rapidly. Katrina Yu has more from the capital, Beijing.
A concert honoring the people of Wuhan and those who lost their lives during the coronavirus pandemic.